181. Forbidden Books and Curses. The next morning, Vadi read about the little Hangleton fire in the Daily Prophet. The article said a dark wizard had been suspected of conducting evil experiments and had burned down an unoccupied vagrant's cottage. The ministry's investigators had found traces of fiend fire, they reported, and fortunately, no one had been hurt. Nowhere did the paper mention that the ruined house had once been the Gunter family mansion, or the family's proud lineage as descendants of Salazar Slytherin. Whether the omission was deliberate or simply the result of some young ministry clerk's ignorance, Vidi didn't know, but he was sure Dumbledore wouldn't let it pass unnoticed. At the breakfast table, Dumbledore was recommending the lamb chops to Flitwick. A thick stack of newspapers sat beside him. Vede lowered his eyes and picked up a different paper, a Muggle daily Ferdinand had sent him. It had clear on-site photos, some even aerial. The flames had burned a perfect circle in the woods, leaving a ring of scorched earth with not a blade of grass inside it and leaves just beyond the edge, untouched. The article indulged in sensational speculation. Aliens, a secret weapon test by a foreign power, each paper offering a different, exaggerated explanation. Vede let out a quiet laugh and set it aside. Breakfast was porridge. The house elves had minced the meat and vegetables finely so he could swallow without chewing. A sprinkling of chopped celery and sesame seeds made the mash look less unappetizing. The Great Hall was already thinning out as students hurried off. The maze had reopened today, and many had rushed to line up without even stopping to eat. After breakfast, Vede went to the library, as usual, to return and borrow books. Thanks to Lockhart, he could get books from the restricted section without trouble, and he always endured Madame Pince's muttered complaints about Lockhart's laxity. Vede suspected the librarian knew more about his permission slips than she let on, but she never pressed the matter. Once the slip was shown, she handed over the books. Whether she treated every student the same way or gave him special leeway, Vede didn't probe. He took the volumes back to Umbrella House and burrowed into them, lately focusing on curses. Lord Voldemort was a master of many curses. Even Dumbledore had been unable to lift whatever hex had cursed the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. To take on someone like him without an inherited protection like Harry's, one had to understand curses. Vade read about all sorts. Simple ones like the leg locker curse, a short-lived trick students used on each other, the killing curse and cruciatus, which demanded violent emotion to cast, and which most at school learned ways to resist. Then there were long-lasting, far-reaching curses that required elaborate preparation and immense skill. Blood curses that transformed people into animals, binding blood oaths, and ancient spells that could turn a human into a rock, keep them asleep forever, or plague them with ceaseless misfortune. Many of those spells carried hidden costs for the caster as well. He was deep in a passage about sacrificial runes when someone patted his shoulder. "Hey, Vede," Michael said, "put the book down. It's almost 11. Time to go." Theo and Ryan were already waiting by the door. Vede blinked. "Go? You didn't forget, did you? Today's Ravenclaw versus Hufflepuff." Michael raised an eyebrow. He had. He'd been up late celebrating the destruction of that Horcrux, the Resurrection Stone, and had slept through the morning. The Ravenclaw-Hufflepuff match had been scheduled the same weekend as the postponed Gryffindor-Slytherin game. After December, the wind at altitude was brutal, and the House Deans didn't want to push matches further, so both were held this weekend, whether it made a schedule clash or not. By the time they reached the stadium, it was crowded, but the stands weren't split as neatly as yesterday. Both Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff enjoyed broad support. Students from other houses had mixed in, and Vade even noticed a few Ravenclaws slipping off their blue and bronze scarves to blend with the Hufflepuff crowd. When a Ravenclaw was spotted, he defended himself indignantly. "We're not betraying anyone. Cedric's playing. He's in his first match," someone argued. "He needs backing." Dalton, Ravenclaw's seeker, flung his hands up. "I'm not the one catching bugs up there." His girlfriend kissed his cheek and teased, "You're an adult now. Be careful when you're in the air. Don't knock any first years off their brooms." Dalton's grin died. His girlfriend drifted toward the opposite stands. He looked helplessly at the two younger boys next to him. "And you two, are you cheering for Hufflepuff?" Michael clapped Dalton's arm. Of course we're for Ravenclaw. Go Ravenclaw! Dalton brightened and stalked off toward his team, muttering playful insults as he went. Pretty boy, he hissed. Quite a formidable opponent, isn't he? A soft, ethereal voice said at Vidi's side. He turned to see Luna, holding an eagle-shaped scepter, a long branch with a paper eagle affixed to the top, delicately crafted. Vid nodded. Hello, Luna. On impulse, he tapped the paper eagle with his wand. It stirred, turned its head twice, and let out a high, clear shriek. People nearby startled and looked over. Luna, unfazed, beamed and said, Much better, thank you. She strolled to the front railing, the little eagle chirping occasionally, and carving a path through the crowd as others stepped aside. Even the Hufflepuff players glanced up. Vid saw Cedric standing with his broom at the edge of the pitch. Tall and handsome, with sharply defined features and a slight, confident smile, he was a fourth year, but not much shorter than the older captains on the field. His build might have seemed ungainly for a seeker, but he looked calm and untroubled by the prospect of failure. With the referee's whistle, the match began. As soon as Michael arrived at the stadium, he ran off to find Padma. That area was crowded with girls, so Vidi didn't join them. He found an empty spot and settled in to watch. He wasn't especially interested in Quidditch, but it was a match for his own house, and he felt he ought to show up. Look quick, the players are off. There's a change in Hufflepuff's lineup. They've got a new seeker, Cedric Diggory, who has a face I envy. Jordan. Sorry, Professor. I got carried away. Right, back to the match. The Quaffles with Ravenclaw. Lee Jordan's commentary filled the stadium. Vid was trying to pick out the Ravenclaw players, most of them unknown to him, when someone sat down beside him. Harry, Vid asked, is your arm better? All the bones have grown back. Harry flexed it a little. His movements were still stiff. Madame Pomfrey told me to move it more. She says it'll loosen up in a few days. Magic is truly convenient, Vid said. If you were a muggle, you'd be crippled for life. Yeah. Harry sounded relieved. Where's Sirius? Vid asked casually, looking up at the figures in the sky. He went back this morning, Harry said. Sirius told me to thank you, and he wants to give you a birthday present. He asked what you'd like, and I said you like to read. Harry grinned. He said the Black family is very old and that there are loads of books at home. Vid's eyes lit up. So Sirius invited me to the Black family's old house for Christmas? He said I can go through the study and if I like anything, I can take it away? Harry nodded enthusiastically, as if confirming every word. Vid laughed. That would be terribly impolite, he said with mock primness. I'd only need to copy them. I knew you'd like it, Harry said. But Sirius also told me to warn you. The Blacks are the nasty sort of dark wizard family you imagine. It's not grand or elegant, might even be dangerous. Isn't that even better? Vid raised an eyebrow. Harry laughed too, full of the same eager anticipation. The buildings at Grelling Farm were plain, but the household's magical creatures were wonderful. The Weasleys were poor, but magic made ordinary days bright and interesting. Lupin's home was warm and comfortable, the best sort of home Harry could imagine. Sirius had apparently been tidying and decorating recently. Harry had intended to help him over the weekend, but his injury in the maze ruined those plans. Sirius described the Black House as gloomy, terrifying, and dull, but Vidi thought that if Harry grew up there, he might take it for granted. To them, an ancient mansion full of secrets sounded far more compelling than an ordinary wizard family home. A long whistle cut across their chatter. The match ended. Cedric had caught the golden snitch, giving Hufflepuff a 20-point victory. The stands erupted with applause and cheering. Even most of the Ravenclaw students clapped politely, save for a few visibly annoyed players. Many of the girls hadn't been paying much attention to the score anyway. They'd come to gawk at Cedric's handsome face. Harry, though, looked serious. Our match against Hufflepuff is in March, he said, worried. I thought Cedric would be clumsy as Seeker. Vid remembered how the second-year match had been disrupted by the basilisk and couldn't finish properly, how in the third year the Dementors had appeared at the stadium and Harry had fainted, and how the fourth year had been swallowed up by the Triwizard Tournament. No Quidditch that year, and Cedric had later been killed by Peter Pettigrew. In the original sequence, Harry never truly faced Cedric on the pitch. Thinking this through, Vid gave Harry a light, Sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Looks like wood's going to make you train twice as hard. Harry nodded, still shadowed by worry. Thank goodness for the Christmas break. No matter how much he loved Quidditch, Harry hated Wood's brutal training. This year, he wouldn't be staying at school for the holidays. He wasn't homeless anymore, so he planned to go home. After the match, he went to find the others and began inviting them to spend Christmas at his house. It's the first time I've invited friends for Christmas. Actually, the first time ever. Sirius told me to bring a few friends to help clean up. Harry said it cheerfully, half joking. Veed's smile froze. Help clean up? The Black family's old house was layered in years of grime. The house elf, who resented Sirius for being his master, refused to work. In the story, Mrs. Weasley had led a squad of family and friends to clean for days just to make a handful of rooms presentable. Veed's expression turned troubled. He could practice magic endlessly to improve himself, but he had no taste for repetitive, tedious chores. Should he bring his magical puppets or reinvent the cleaning crabs? He could do both, but what if the resentful house elf sabotaged them? Those alchemical creations weren't indestructible. He'd have to deal with the house elf somehow. He remembered the elf's name, Creature, and that the strategy for handling him was in a book somewhere. Vedi had planned to visit the cave only after Sirius's health improved. But for the sake of the Black House's library, and to minimize time spent on menial cleaning so he could study, he secretly moved his plan forward in his mind. Thinking of the cave led him to Horcruxes, to the resurrection stone in his bag, and then to Dumbledore. Veed noticed Dumbledore wasn't in the teacher's stand today. Had Dumbledore come looking for Harry yesterday, after the maze? Harry had been injured there. Was Dumbledore worried someone might attack him again during the match? Veed felt his heart skip. As Harry finished inviting Ron and Hermione and passed by to look for Michael, Veed waved him over. Harry approached, puzzled. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I forgot to ask you," Veed said, more serious than before. "Yesterday, after the match ended, why did you suddenly fall from the sky?" Veed suddenly realized he'd overlooked something. Because a similar scene had happened in the original timeline, he hadn't thought anything of it at first. Now that he thought it through, though, something didn't add up. In the original story, Dobby had chased Harry with a rogue bludger in that match and broken his arm. The later fall came because Harry had risked catching the golden snitch while injured. But in yesterday's match, Dumbledore had been sitting in the stands. Would a house elf dare to attack Harry there? After all, even Quirrell, when he'd been possessed by Voldemort, hadn't dared to harm Harry right under Dumbledore's nose. Hearing Veed's question, Harry paused, thought for a moment, and then said, "It seems to have been Darian." Veed didn't know the Slytherin team very well. "That chaser?" he asked. "Wasn't he the really tall one? You said seems to be. Why not sure?" "He was a little behind me, to my right," Harry explained. "I saw his wand move, and then my head spun, like I'd been hit with a bat. I blacked out for a few seconds and fell off my broom." He hesitated. "But I'm not entirely certain the spell came from Darian's wand." Veed nodded. "Some spells show as vivid beams of light, but most are invisible to the naked eye. If a spell is cast quietly, only the caster and any witnesses who were watching that very moment would know it happened. There was also the priori incantatem test, but that was a sensitive procedure. Checking someone's wand with priori is the magical equivalent of a muggle frisk by the police. A scuffle in the stands didn't justify dragging everyone to the headmaster for a wand inspection. The match had already had consequences. 2 Gryffindor players had been injured, Slytherin had lost a lot of house points, and the students involved had been given detention. Slytherin were stronger to begin with, played dirty on the pitch, and rode the latest Firebolt 2001 brooms, so they'd pulled ahead early. But when Harry caught the snitch, Gryffindor gained 150 points, and Slytherin's hoped-for victory vanished. It was plausible that some Slytherins would resent Harry and strike back in secret. Veed wondered aloud, did I overthink it? But if it was revenge, why hadn't they acted at the start of the game? Had they waited, letting resentment build? Veed sank into thought again, turning the possibilities over in his head. Harry didn't want to intrude on his friend's concentration, so he left to round up Michael and the others. He was looking forward to the Christmas gathering and wished the holidays would come already. As the crowd dispersed, Theo spotted Veed and hurried over. "Veed, why are you sitting here by yourself?" "Ah, Theo, I was just looking for you." Veed's eyes flicked back to the pitch. The Ravenclaw players had already left, but Cedric Diggory still stood on the field, surrounded by a cluster of admiring girls. He smiled politely, a little embarrassed, and bowed as he answered them. Veed dug a rolled scroll from his bag. "My History of Magic and Muggle History comparison timeline is finished, and I've marked all the key points. You can copy it if you want. Please give this one to Cedric Diggory." "Finished?" Theo's surprise quickly turned to delight. He took the scroll, unfurled it, and was immediately absorbed by the clear, detailed notes, intuitive tree diagrams and tables, neat formatting. He knew how long Veed had been working on this. After finishing the History of Magic notes, at Hermione's suggestion, Veed had made a Muggle history timeline too. Then, with help from friends, mainly Marchione, he'd gathered past OBUL questions and woven them into the material to make it easier to memorize. Hogwarts used the same History of Magic syllabus from 1st to 5th year. Other history books were usually just reference material for essays. Veed had even cited sources when he quoted other works. The scroll looked plain, but it was a polished, invaluable study aid. Theo thought that mastering it could easily earn an O in the OBUL History of Magic exam, and that continuing the subject in 6th and 7th year wouldn't be so daunting. Isn't this a bit too precious to give away?" Theo asked, a little reluctant at the idea. Veed was earnest. "Back in 1st year, we asked Cedric for help buying things a lot, and caused him trouble. I wanted to repay him somehow. Money alone didn't seem to match what he did, but these notes, after all the hours I put into them, seemed like a fair way to say thank you." "He's taking his ODIWLs next year, right? I know his grades are good, but this should help with revision." At one point, Veed had even thought about teaming up with the Weasley twins to sell the notes. A good study guide for students never went out of style, and with Professor Binns's soporific lectures, the pass rate for History of Magic on the OWLs was always low. But with Professor Mori's help, Veed had since gained financial independence, and once he wasn't short on money, he'd lost the taste for selling the notes. He preferred to help friends the way Professor Mori had helped him. Theo was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "This won't be just a bit of help. This will be huge. I'll give it to him in the common room." "Okay." Veed stood, gathering his things to head back to the castle, when a brown owl swooped down and landed beside him. It bowed its head slightly, a rolled-up note clutched in its beak. Since owls had become more reliable, few people used ordinary owls for simple messages nowadays, but this one had come all the same. Veed unrolled the letter and read the slender, neat script. "Dear Vey, if it is convenient for you, please come to the headmaster's office at 8 o'clock this evening after dinner. I hope this will not disrupt your gathering with friends. P.S. I have lately taken a fancy to treacle tart, though Madame Pomfrey assures me it is not good for my teeth. Yours faithfully, Albus Dumbledore." At 8 o'clock, Veed arrived at the door to the headmaster's office. The ugly stone gargoyle stared at him with its head cocked. "Sherbet lemon," Veed said. The gargoyle moved aside, and the spiral staircase rose as he stepped onto it. He climbed until he reached the oak door with its brass knocker. He rapped once. The door opened quietly. Inside, Dumbledore was bent over a large table, a sorting hat sitting beside him. Portraits of former headmasters lined the walls, chattering away until the door opened. Then everything fell silent as they all turned to look at him. The office was as bright as day, candles that never went out giving everything a warm glow. Fawkes stood on the brass ring that held the candles. Compared to last year, the phoenix looked old and frail, its feathers sparse, as if it might fall apart at any moment. "Oh, Veda, you're prompt." Dumbledore stood and smiled. "Come and see. I found a very interesting toy today." "Good evening, Professor Dumbledore." Veed stepped closer. On the table, several tiny magical creatures went about their business. Miniature phoenixes, dragons, pegasi, even a rheum. Some drank from thimble-sized bowls. Some played, some rested. Each had an exquisite little nest. A thumb-sized wizard in a pointed hat lived among them, by a fairy tale mushroom house with a wisp of white smoke curling from its chimney. It looked like a real tiny village. The tiny wizard and a dragon were engaged in a noisy argument. "Move over a bit, I don't have any room," the dragon snapped. "I was here first. Go stand somewhere else," the wizard retorted. "How much space do you need? Just squeeze in," the dragon huffed. All right, you can have it," the little wizard stormed off, and the dragon giggled and went after him apologetically. The Riem brokered peace. Okay, don't quarrel," it said. "It's our owner's fault for not giving us more space. If I had money, I'd want a golden nest," a phoenix complained gloomily. "This wooden house always feels like it's about to burn, so I'm afraid to move." A Pegasus snorted and went back to sleep. "Don't be hard on the owner," the dragon scolded. "It's not his fault he's poor. He's trying his best to give us a good home. Don't be sad, owner. I love you." It looked up at Dumbledore and gave Vidi a polite nod. "Hello, little wizard." Dumbledore laughed and stroked his long beard, which even had a ribbon tied through it. "Aren't they delightful? They've added a great deal of fun to my life," he said. "I hear these were your work?" "Yes," Vidi answered briefly. "They are excellent, Vidi, simply delightful. Fawkes and the Sorting Hat adore them. Those two could chat with these little ones all day." Dumbledore's smile turned a touch anxious. "Only trouble is, they keep hinting for me to buy them things. Any solution?" Vidi hesitated. "Sorry, Professor. A pet's personality is set when it's created. It can be changed, but that's essentially killing the original one." At that, the tiny creatures froze. The ram retreated until only its back was showing. The dragon and the thumb-sized wizard stopped fighting and clung to each other, trembling, looking at the two of them with terrified, pleading eyes. "No, don't," the little wizard whimpered. "I don't want to die." The dragon nodded frantically. Dumbledore sighed. "In that case, let's not." He smiled. "Actually, their money-loving ways are rather amusing." Relieved, the miniature animals relaxed and soon returned to their games. The Sorting Hat piped up. "Ravenclaw is surely right for you, Vidi Gray. You were born for Ravenclaw." "Thanks," Vidi said with a little irritation. "But even in Hufflepuff, I could have done something. Knowledge isn't bound by house." The hat flapped in thought, its tip wiggling, as if considering a retort. Fawkes let out a soft call, and a few tail feathers drifted down. Vidi caught them and set them on the table. "You keep them," Dumbledore said. "Phoenix tail feathers are very useful. Wands, potions, alchemy. Don't be fooled by Fawkes's fragile looks. Those feathers still hold powerful magic." "Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Fawkes." V didn't bother with ceremony. He put the feathers away, already imagining the potions and alchemical uses. "You're welcome," Dumbledore said. "I look forward to more surprises and changes from you. I suppose Terence thinks the same." Terence was Professor Maury's first name. "Is there something you wanted, Professor?" Vidi asked. He hadn't tried to hide what had happened recently. The burn marks in Little Hangleton had made the papers. The Gaunt family's old house had been burned down. Dumbledore had taken him there not long before, and it was only natural the headmaster might be suspicious. Or perhaps Lupin, after seeing something during their operations, had reported his suspicions to Dumbledore. Vidi put one hand on the edge of the table and waited. Dumbledore's expression grew gentle. "I suppose you remember our last visit to that old friend?" "Of course," Vidi nodded. "Lord Voldemort's rise was impressive. What surprised me most was that he, being a half-blood, kept insisting on pure blood supremacy. He loathes the Muggle part of his own ancestry," Dumbledore said, "and he's used that ideology to draw like-minded followers and build power." Vidi cut in, curiosity getting the better of him. "Then why didn't someone reveal his background in the papers? His followers preach pure blood superiority, if they knew their master was half-blood." He didn't finish. The question hung in the air. Dumbledore laughed softly, indulgent in his eyes, as if Vidi had asked a naive question. Vidi felt foolish. "Few people know that Lord Voldemort was once called Tom Riddle," Dumbledore said. "But he never tried to hide his origins in the way you imagine. His earliest followers, the core Death Eaters, knew of his shameful origin and that he killed his father. Voldemort himself does not shy away from such things. He relies on powerful magic to command loyalty. He believes he is above Muggles, even denies any kinship, and that belief is what binds his followers. They do not speak of his mixed blood among themselves. They prefer to proclaim him a pure-blood Slytherin descendant. It's a lie of convenience. The ideology is useful to him, rule by pure blood, disdain for Muggleborns, but Lord Voldemort's personal history is a far more complicated matter. Dumbledore held out his hand. Today I'd like to take you to visit another old friend. Would you care to make another journey, Veed? 185. Grindelwald Veda didn't hesitate. He took Dumbledore's hand. Fawkes, the old phoenix, gave a clear, ringing cry. Vade heard the ticking of clock hands and the rustle of turning pages. The world around them blurred and shifted like a kaleidoscope. It felt a bit like apparition, but without the claustrophobic squeeze. Then Vede lurched, and the scene snapped into place. They stood in a building he didn't recognize. Thick stone walls were scored with scratches. Torches were set into the walls, their flames burning fiercely. The air looked cold. Though Vede couldn't feel it, he saw people moving about in heavy fur coats, their breath visible as white mist. Their faces, however, were blurred, like a low-resolution surveillance image. "What kind of magic is this, Professor?" Vede asked. "A form of memory magic," Dumbledore said. "A rather complex application." He smiled faintly. "I could have used the pensieve, taken you into the original memory, but it would have been far too long." Vede watched the scene unfold. Memory fragments, Dumbledore had explained, carried heaps of redundant detail, small moments, trivial conversations, and stitching them together into a continuous experience would take too much time. This display was a dramatic condensation of one man's past. They followed a party of professors and students in crimson robes down the dark corridor, around corners, and down flights of stone steps. At last, they stopped before a wooden door carved with a circle inside a triangle and crossed by a vertical line, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. The lead wizard, stern-faced, pointed his wand, and the door exploded inward. Everyone surged into the room. There, back to the door, stood a handsome blonde boy with pale skin and blue eyes like chips of ice. While most faces around them remained indistinct, this youth was unnervingly clear, as though he existed on a different layer of the memory. He turned at the noise, then frowned, moving his wand in a small, precise arc as if in a private dance. Shelves lined the room, crowded with bottles and jars. At first glance, it resembled Snape's potions classroom. A closer look made Vede's skin crawl. Some jars held twisted, contorted shapes. Others churned with black smoke that seemed to wail. A book lay open on the table, its sketches depicting people enduring cruel tortures. "Gellert Grindelwald," the man who had entered bellowed. "We have reports that you have been conducting forbidden experiments. I thought it slander. Turns out it was true." Grindelwald looked at the accuser with a half-smile. One of the students flinched and ducked behind a professor. They seized at the blonde. He was roughly hauled forward. "Just wait," someone hissed. "You'll be expelled. This sort of thing is intolerable." "Oh, is that so?" Grindelwald sneered. When a hand reached for his wand, he struck back without hesitation. A spell burst from his wand with sudden violence, sending the attacker flying. Blood spattered. Someone screamed. A fierce fight broke out. Blue flames leapt across the floor. A student rolled and screamed. Grindelwald was hurled into a shelf. Glass bottles crashed and shattered. He sat up, blood trailing from the corner of his eye and down the bridge of his nose. Even wounded, he was breathtaking, an impact of beauty that defied gender. He lifted his chin, and a red beam shot from his wand, striking one of his assailants. For a heartbeat, Vede felt as if the spell had hit him. His perspective pitched, and the scene blurred. When it resolved, the boy stood outside the stern castle of Durmstrang, bruised and carrying a suitcase. The fortress loomed on a black mountaintop like a blade. Grindelwald stopped, carved a symbol into the stone, and then walked away without a backward glance. Vede and Dumbledore followed for a time. Then, as if the memory shifted, they were somewhere else. A bright valley under clear sun, green grass rippling in a gentle breeze. Two teenagers strolled together. "And then I was expelled," the blonde finished, shrugging with arrogant disdain. "Stupid school. I thought Durmstrang might be more enlightened, but they're all cowards." Beside him walked a red-haired boy whose features, while less distinct, revealed him to be handsome too, with bright blue eyes. Vede glanced at Dumbledore. The old principal's half-moon spectacles caught the light, so his expression was unreadable. Vede didn't pry into the private wounds of a man who had lived so long. He turned his attention back to the two boys. Grindelwald went on, voice heated. We are wizards endowed with power. Why should we hide like rats in gutters? The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy is the most ridiculous law. He paced, hands emphatic. It makes us feel as though we are stealing when we use our own magic, afraid every day. Albus, your sister was harmed by a muggle. Why shouldn't your father avenge her? Instead, he was imprisoned, punished by fools who don't know right from wrong. We should strive for dominance, Grindelwald said, eyes blazing. Wizards should rule muggles, rule the world. We should not be driven out by their ever-growing numbers. If force is required, then so be it. This power was given to us for a reason. The red-haired boy's smile faded into a small, tight line. He pursed his lips and nodded, the movement carrying a weight of agreement. 186. Dumbledore and Grindelwald. As the two young men walked, the scene changed almost imperceptibly. It seemed like another day. Their clothes had shifted subtly. They sat beneath a tree, the orange-red light of the sinking sun flashing in their eyes. For the greater good. I like that saying, Grindelwald said, sprawled on the grass, one pale hand stretched toward the sky as if he could hold the whole world. Albus, only you understand what I mean. Only you can understand what I want, he continued. I want to abolish the International Statute of Secrecy. Let wizards rule the world. Let us use our powers freely, not be oppressed, hidden, forced to endure muggle disgust and scorn. Rulers must be responsible to everyone, the younger Dumbledore answered firmly. Not just to wizards, also to most muggles. Most muggles? Grindelwald curled his lip. Those greedy, foolish muggles? Think about what they did to your family. I know. I dislike, even hate certain muggles, Albus admitted, frowning. But we must admit that most of them are not evil. They have wisdom and ability. Even if we win power, we must keep society stable and treat muggles fairly. We're fighting for the future of wizards. We won't cower, but blind slaughter isn't wise. Gellert, we must minimize sacrifice on both sides. You're a little too naive, Albus, Grindelwald said, displeasure flashing across his face. Then, softer, he smiled like a conspirator. Of course I'm not about mindless murder. If muggles accept my rule, I'll be kind to them. Albus smiled back, trusting. Then Ariana could live more freely, no more confinement. If it's possible, I hope she can be cured. Perhaps I can find a way to help her. If we find the Hallows, anything is possible, Grindelwald said, his voice bright and seductive. Resurrection, healing the sick, remaking the wizarding world, our ideal kingdom. As long as the two of us are together, nothing is impossible. Nothing can stop us. They dreamt aloud how they would seize power after leaving Godric's Hollow, where they might find the Hallows, what they would do with them. Confident grins lit their faces as if victory were already in hand. Then a voice cut through the reverie. Albus, a tall, scruffy, thin youth, stood glaring at Grindelwald, his eyes unkind. Then he looked at Albus. Ariana wants to see you. Grindelwald's expression hardened into disdain. Albus looked mildly annoyed, but rose and walked toward the other boy. Is she throwing a tantrum? He asked. Yes, the youth said. I calmed her down. She misses you. They moved off together, side by side. Behind them, Grindelwald's face went very dark. That's my brother, Aberforth said. Nearby, the older Dumbledore's voice was a whisper. Ariana is our little sister. Veed, do you know about obscurials? Veed nodded. I learned from Mr. Bro Scamander. Children with magic who are abused or taught to hate their powers can develop a parasitic force called an obscurus. An obscurial is the child who bears it. The obscurus is the dark, unstable energy itself. Most obscurials don't survive past 10, but in extreme cases an obscurial can fully transform into an obscurus. Veed had seen books about obscuruses at Newt Scamander's house. Newt, it was said, knew more about them than almost anyone. He had even preserved an obscurus by special means when he was young, though Veed had not seen it himself. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Ariana was an obscurial, he said. When she was little, she showed her magic by accident and was cruelly abused by 3 Muggle boys. After that, she began to lose control of the magic inside her. Veed saw the little girl then. She was older than Veed's present body looked, but her expression was timorous. Her clear blue eyes were like a pure lake, innocent, frightened, childlike. She huddled in a corner while 3 boys in the room erupted in a fierce argument. Impossible! You can't take her with you. Do you expect her to travel in that state? You're mad, one boy shouted. Aberforth thundered. Abandon this plan now. I'll never allow it. Dumbledore said nothing. Grindelwald mocked. You foolish boy, don't you see how extraordinary your brother is? You'd be nothing but a stumbling block to him and me. Once we change the world, make muggles behave, wizards won't need hiding. Your sister could live openly. Get out, Durmstrang bastard. Aberforth spat, furious. It's you, you despicable madman, who bewitched my brother into thinking this is a good idea. Get out of my house, Grindelwald. Shut up, Aberforth, Albus snapped. But Grindelwald's face had already gone terrifying. He drew his wand without hesitation and pointed it at Aberforth. Avada Kedavra. Aberforth was caught off guard. He collapsed with a scream. Gellert, stop! Stop it! Someone cried. Albus lunged, knocked the ferocious-looking Grindelwald down, and reached to help his brother. Aberforth shoved him roughly away and, pulling out his own wand, sent a spell straight at Grindelwald. With a roar, the room exploded into chaos, lightning spells crashing, furniture splintering. They began to fight in blind fury. Albus tried to intervene, but Aberforth and Grindelwald were beyond reason. Aberforth's resentment for his brother's perceived betrayal drove him to strike at Albus himself, which only enraged Grindelwald more. Spells tangled in the air. Screams and shouts rose in terrible waves. No, no. Ariana sobbed in the corner. She was shaking, drenched in tears. Her eyes were whitening. Black mist welled from her small body. The others were too occupied with their rage to notice. V gripped Dumbledore's hand and whispered, You don't have to recall this. What do you want to ask me? Dumbledore repeated, then waved a hand as if to dismiss the question. Ah, my apologies. He wiped his eyes and forced a composure that didn't quite reach his voice. Memories have a way of making one sentimental. Those were hard days. Veed nodded without looking at him. The translucent figure dissolved and reassembled. Ariana lay on the ground, pale and unseeing. Aberforth lunged to his sister's side. The young Dumbledore stood frozen, blank-faced. Grindelwald stepped back, flustered, as if about to speak. Then, before Dumbledore could meet his eyes, turned and fled in panic. A diamond-shaped pendant flashed briefly, its gem burning a fierce red. The scene shifted, then a funeral blurred past, Aberforth striking Dumbledore until his nose broke, Dumbledore offering no resistance as blood ran down his face. The once ambitious young man fell silent and broken, his dreams fell to dust. Dumbledore returned to school, teaching as students flowed around him like part of a long, unreal dream. Grindelwald, meanwhile, had risen. Taller, stronger, his wand replaced by the unbeatable Elder Wand, he traveled and spoke from high platforms. No fear remained in his face, sometimes stern and calm, sometimes fanatic but sincere, and always with an irresistible force that drew followers. They were different from Death Eaters who knelt to Voldemort. Grindelwald's followers, witchcraft purists, were zealous, uncompromising. They carried out terror. The elderly, pregnant women, infants, anyone in their way was ruthlessly eliminated. Bombs and arson left no thought for collateral victims. Some followers still felt remorse, but Grindelwald would place a hand on a young recruit's shoulder and tell them, earnestly, the small sacrifices now secure the future of the entire wizarding world. Tragedy is inevitable on the road ahead. Believe me, child, I am heartbroken too. If persuasion could win, we wouldn't need war. The public is blind, the ministry bloated and impotent. This world belongs to the strong. Wizards must speak with blood and fire to live with dignity. Those who die now, our parents, our children watching from beyond, must have their will carried forward. We must bear infamy and misunderstanding, burn everything for a new future. I believe we can make wizards rise, break the statute of secrecy, and force muggles to recognize our superiority. I will dedicate my life to that cause until our comrades can live without fear. Hold your heads high, child. You've committed no crime. You only exchange the few for the many, the present for the future. Even if our pain is misunderstood, history will prove us right. If you cannot understand, do not think. I will think for you and bear your sins. You must do only one thing. Follow me. The black tide of war spread from country to country. Wizards wearing new emblems marched with resolute expressions and a fierce sense of mission, leaving corpses in their wake. They ignored the terrified cries, but Dumbledore could not. Bound by a blood oath never to harm Grindelwald, he could not face him directly and entrusted the fight to Newt Scamander and others. Veedy had read the rest in history books and seen it reenacted in films. Repeated attempts by Grindelwald to grab power, thwarted by Dumbledore and Scamander. The rise and fall of the purists. The final duel as the Muggle World War wound down. Grindelwald was defeated, Dumbledore took the Elder Wand, and Grindelwald was imprisoned in the Tower of Nurmengard. Time passed. The ethereal Dumbledore shifted into the familiar figure Vade knew, long white hair and beard, seated in an armchair, eyes full of the hard-won wisdom of years. A gaunt man in a dark green uniform stood before him. "He regrets what he did," the man said. "He wants to see you. He hopes to apologize." Dumbledore considered it, then shook his head. "There's no need. If he truly feels remorse for the terror he unleashed, he should confess to those he harmed." The vision evaporated like mist. Vede blinked and found himself back in the headmaster's office, as if they had never left. Fawkes, the Phoenix, and the Sorting Hat were idly entertaining a cluster of small magical pets. The portraits of past principals dozed on the walls. Dumbledore, seated in his armchair, looked old and tired as if he might collapse, but his back stayed straight. Vede sat beside him, careful to keep his eyes elsewhere. After a long silence, Dumbledore finally said, "If you have anything to ask me, you may do so now." Vede wondered what Dumbledore expected. Questions about Grindelwald, about Dumbledore's own mistakes, about the Elder Wand, or his pursuit of the Deathly Hallows. He shook his head. "I have nothing to ask," he said. A few seconds passed. Then Vede added, quietly, "What do you want to ask me?" Dumbledore looked down. His eyes were moist, and in that light they echoed the Ariana in Vede's vision. He understood immediately the subtext of Vede's question. "If you ask, I will answer. I will be honest." Vede didn't trust easily, but when an old man lays bare his most shameful wounds to teach what is right, what reason remains to hide? Dumbledore saw Vede's honesty, just as he had once glimpsed Grindelwald's cold cruelty, and this time he chose to listen to that quieter voice within. "I have nothing to ask either," he said. "I will wait. Tell me when you are ready. Whenever, whatever you need to say." That closed the subject. Vede rose to leave, hesitating by the doorway. "Professor, do you have any plans next weekend?" "Nothing more important than a drink at the Three Broomsticks," Dumbledore replied. "I have a place I'd like to invite you to," Vede said carefully. Dumbledore's smile was immediate. "I'd be delighted." December 8th. A full moon hung heavy and perfect in the sky, its light casting deep and pale patterns across the world. Vede pulled out the leaf, and Sirius inspected it closely. Remus, mid-transformation into a werewolf but lucid from wolfsbane, lay on the ground and squinted at the mandrake leaf as well. Sirius leaned against Remus without a care. "Perfect. Intact," Sirius said, pleased. "Just to be sure, you haven't let it leave your mouth even once this month?" "No," Vede said, placing the leaf carefully into a clear crystal bottle so the moonlight could touch it. Remus breathed with relief. "I saw you talking a few times as usual and feared it had failed," he admitted, but he didn't press. Vede didn't volunteer details, and he valued the teenager's pride. Sirius shook his head in mock disbelief. "When I practiced, I kept swallowing it. I failed so many times I finally had to glue my teeth shut to get through a month." Vede smiled. "I used a sticking charm too. I practiced getting used to its presence." Remus said, "Let's move on to the next step." Vede plucked a strand of his own hair, dropped it into the bottle, added a silver teaspoon of dew and the chrysalis of a death's head hawkmoth. Sirius took the bottle, swirled it, watching the ingredients blend. "That'll do," he said, putting it down. They carried the crystal bottle down to the cellar. Remus had dug a deep, narrow pit there just wide enough for the bottle. V packed straw around it, covered it with a stone slab and felt, and they left, sealing the cellar's trapdoor. Sirius locked it. "We won't open it until the next thunderstorm," Remus said. "Sirius and I have warded it too. No rats or curious magical creatures getting in. An animagus file must lie quietly and undisturbed, not where people or animals pass, and not to be checked on now and then. Many bury theirs deep in remote woods to be safe. Wizards know the pain of preparing for months only to find a rat has dug something up during a storm. Sirius and his friends had fallen into enough of those traps to learn all the precautions, and they'd prepared thoroughly for Vede. "Remember the incantation," Sirius warned. "At sunrise and sunset every day, point your wand at your heart and say, 'Amato animo animato animagus.' Not once less. Miss a day, and you start over." I've set an alarm, Veed said. One isn't enough, Sirius said, haunted by memory. Set several. What if you oversleep? They laughed, and Remus grew a little wistful. The next storm could come at any time, he said, but only when you feel a second heartbeat are you truly ready. Sirius added, even if you feel it, the habit of chanting twice a day can't be broken, not once. Veed hesitated, then asked, is there any way to influence what I'll become? What do you hope to turn into? Sirius asked. I can't very well become a slug, can I? Veed said. That would be useless. Sirius laughed. You can't control it. James and I wanted lions. James became a stag, and I turned into a huge black dog. Remus said, if you want a hint, learn the Patronus charm. Your Patronus and your Animagus aren't always the same, but they often aren't worlds apart. And Veed, don't worry. You won't become a slug or an ant. Your form reflects who you are inside. They traded stories about their Animagus practice long into the night before Veed headed back to school, Tuesday, with classes tomorrow. At the gate, he stopped. Remus, let's go out this weekend. Remus paused. His werewolf features softened into seriousness. Again? Just the two of us? Veed looked at Sirius, who watched with curiosity but didn't press. Is Mr. Black free? Of course I am, Sirius said eagerly. Remus has been so secretive about it, I had to nag. Veed smiled. Michael and the others won't come this time, but Dumbledore will be there. Remus's eyes widened, then warmed into a smile. With Dumbledore coming, it'll go much more smoothly, he said. He had always worried that Veed might distrust Dumbledore. Both men had changed Remus's life, and he didn't want any conflict between them. Seeing Veed's invitation eased him. As Veed left, Sirius grabbed Remus by the collar. You'll tell me this time, right? What's your secret? Remus considered for a moment. There's a lot I don't understand yet, he admitted. I can only tell you what happened before. And remember, if a werewolf is conscious through the transformation, he can still speak. 188. A trip to the caves. Only 1 week remained until the end of term. It had snowed through the night, and by morning, the castle grounds and the distant forbidden forest were wrapped in white. Students' footsteps made a steady crunch as they walked. This weekend was a Hogsmeade weekend, and almost all the older students planned to go into the village. Michael and his friends had eagerly prepared to head out early. Although many could sneak out through the disappearing cabinet, most students feared breaking school rules. Besides, if only a few pupils showed up in the village, the shopkeepers would spot them right away. Some would turn a blind eye, but most would scold them or demand they return to school at once. Only on Hogsmeade weekends did they have a decent chance of being treated like normal visitors. When Veed finished breakfast and stepped into the corridor, he saw Michael and Padma, both wearing green scarves, walking hand in hand. The two separated reflexively when they noticed him. Hi, Veedy, Michael said in a surprisingly high-spirited voice. Looks like you're heading out too. Anthony Goldstein came out from behind V and looked at them curiously. Where are you going? Michael, having nearly blurted the plan, laughed awkwardly and amended. Of course, just for a walk. The snow looks beautiful today. Anthony eyed him suspiciously. You're not planning to sneak out during Hogsmeade weekend, are you? Don't. Several students have already been caught by Filch. Who now? Michael asked, amused. A few first-year Gryffindors, Anthony said. They figured that if they dressed warmly, Filch wouldn't notice. Gryffindors, Michael said seriously. That figures, but I wasn't planning to break rules. I just wanted to admire the snow. Of course, the snow is really something today. A bouncy voice interrupted them. Michael and Anthony started to move away, but someone's arm slid around their shoulders. Let me see who this is. Michael and Anthony, two of my favorite students. Lockhart beamed, putting his arms around them, then looked to the side. Oh, and Padma, worried you won't see me over Christmas? Don't worry. I must go to France for an important engagement, but I'll be back on time to teach you in January. I promise, my dear students. The three forced polite smiles. Good morning, Professor, they said in unison. Good morning. Lockhart nodded and scanned the crowd until he spotted who he wanted. Colin, come take a picture for us. Okay, Professor. Colin Creevy hurried over with his camera. Michael and the others mouthed pleas to one another to get away. Michael glanced for Veedy, but his classmate had slipped away. That sly fellow must have disillusioned himself. Michael muttered to Padma. Padma nodded vaguely, though in front of the camera she gave a practiced, lovely smile. Click. Colin took the photo. "I'll develop the pictures and mail them to you," Colin said, and then turned to Lockhart. "Professor, could you take a picture with Harry Potter too?" "I was just thinking that," Lockhart declared, letting go of Michael and Anthony. His eyes found Harry in the crowd. "Come on, Harry. You'll want a picture of me to look at over the holidays, won't you? Don't be shy, boy. You know I adore your admiration." Before Harry could protest, Lockhart grabbed his arm and pulled him close, flashing that famous smile. Harry looked toward Michael and the others with an expression that pleaded, "Why are you letting him do this?" They avoided his eyes guiltily. Lockhart kept coaching Harry into a charming pose. Harry had no interest in playing along, but Colin excitedly pressed the shutter. Michael felt sorry for him, then quietly tugged at Padma's sleeve and signaled they should slip away. The two squeezed out of the small crowd. Michael froze. Draco Malfoy was standing in the shadow of a nearby corridor, arms crossed, watching the scene with a cold expression. Michael realized Malfoy hadn't been harassing Harry lately. Not just Harry, Neville hadn't been bullied either. Since Crabbe and Goyle stopped following Malfoy like immovable pillars, Malfoy's presence had diminished. Michael shook his head and left with Padma down the stairway. Soon Crabbe and Goyle trudged past as well. Goyle munched on a few cakes he'd grabbed for dessert, while Crabbe, imitating Malfoy's tone, scolded him. "You should be smarter, Gregory," Crabbe said with annoyance. "You're so stupid, Tracy, and the others laugh at us." Goyle nodded blankly, not taking it in. Then Malfoy appeared before them. "Vincent, Gregory." Malfoy stared down at them. "Ah, Draco." Goyle stopped, looked at him stupidly, and walked over. "Have you had breakfast?" Crabbe yanked Goyle back and, scowling, snapped at Malfoy. "Don't think we're still your lackeys. Just because you and your father are rich, I'm better than you." Malfoy regarded his former companions with amusement and let out a cold laugh. "Better than me? Are you sure?" He drew the words out and raised his wand. Nearby, an older Slytherin leaned on a railing, smiling as he watched the small confrontation below. Waves crashed against black rocks, foam churning near the cliff and moving with the tide. The air tasted of salt. On a steep cliff, a crimson flash of light appeared and two figures materialized. "Oh, this is the place." Dumbledore took in the surroundings, his long beard and hair whipping in the wind. He steadied his beard with one hand. A golden red bow had been tied in it. Vidi pulled up his hood and kept his hair from flying wildly. The Phoenix's fire flared, and Lupin and Sirius appeared beside them on the cliff. "Good morning, Dumbledore, Vede," Lupin said. "Good morning." Dumbledore turned to Sirius with genuine concern. "Sirius, how are you feeling?" "Much better," Sirius said, showing the arm that now had some muscle around it. "Activity's the best medicine, but Lupin always wants me resting in a bed at St. Mungo's," he complained to Dumbledore with a half grin. Lupin ignored him, staring instead at the rocks jutting down into the sea. "Where is this?" Lupin asked. "The outskirts of London," Vede answered. "There's a small village nearby, but hardly anyone lives there." Sirius's expression grew solemn. The scent of the sea wind stirred memories of Azkaban. He tried to control his discomfort, drew a deep breath, and asked, "Are we going to the village?" "No." Vede pointed down at the rocks. "We have to go down there." "Down there?" Sirius looked over the cliff at the sheer rock face and the black sea below. "We could apparate. We just have to hope the rocks aren't too slippery." "I'll take you, Vede," Lupin offered, extending his hand. "No, let me take you all." Vede opened his backpack, tapped it with his wand, and several old brooms whirred out, flying toward the group. They'd come from the room of requirement. Zoe and the others had given the best broom to Vede. For this trip, he'd prepared thoroughly, 4 flying brooms so no one would risk apparating onto the rocks or climbing down the slick face. Sirius was the first to grab a broom and straddle it. He hovered for a moment as Vede explained, "The crack we're looking for is close to the sea surface, not very wide, and it may be submerged at high tide. Inside there are steps and a large cave." "So we need to find that crack first?" Lupin confirmed. "Yes." Vede glanced at Dumbledore, noting the old headmaster had not yet located the cave where Voldemort had hidden a Horcrux. Sirius felt a flicker of surprise. Vede seemed to be leading the expedition, even with Dumbledore present. and his description had been oddly precise. He wondered how Vede knew of the place. Seeing that no one else pressed the matter, he pushed off and swooped down, followed by Vede, Lupin, and Dumbledore. They darted among the waves and rocks like birds skimming the water. Sunlight glinted off the stone faces, the smooth rock reflecting light like mirrors. Soon Lupin shouted, "Here!" A red beam from his wand struck the rock face and was swallowed into a narrow, dark crack. The others flew over and hovered above it. The fissure was only about a meter wide from above, a thin black line running along the cliff. Seawater pounded the rough sides, and the walls were slick with clinging algae. The beam of light vanished into the opening, as if leading to the depths. Vede hovered at the entrance, impressed that Lupin had found it so quickly, and thinking of how much effort Dumbledore must have once put into locating a Horcrux here. Effort that had ultimately come to nothing. The sound of the waves made conversation feel unnecessary. They lowered their brooms, leaned forward, and edged into the crack, shoulders brushing wet seaweed. The passage widened the farther they went, until rough stone steps appeared and a huge cave opened ahead. "Lumos," Sirius called, and light fanned out, illuminating the cavern. "Doesn't look like much," he muttered, surprised at how loudly his own voice echoed. They scanned the cave. Lupin studied the rock face carefully, then looked at Dumbledore and Vede. Dumbledore's face was almost boyish with excitement. He moved around the cavern twice, fingertips trailing along the walls, murmuring spells in an unfamiliar tongue and stopping occasionally to probe at one spot. It was clear he wasn't as clueless as he had seemed. What surprised Lupin and Sirius most was Vede. The 12-year-old hadn't walked the cave. Instead, his eyes slowly traced the walls as if seeing lights the others could not. Lupin and Sirius exchanged a glance, part frustration, part astonishment, but they kept quiet, brightening their lights and not interrupting. After some time, Dumbledore stopped and turned to the others. "Vede," he asked, "what have you found?" Vede stepped forward, pressed his palm flat against the stone, and said, "This should be the entrance." Dumbledore's face lit with surprise and joy. "Indeed, this is only the antechamber. Someone has hidden the real entrance with magic." "But who would do this?" Sirius asked. "Who would set up enchantments in such a remote place?" "I have my suspicions, Sirius," Dumbledore said, pointing his wand at the rock. "But there is no need to reveal them now. Everything we seek is surely inside." Chapter 18. Black, where Dumbledore pointed his wand, the outline of an arch appeared in the rock, and a dazzling white light spilled from within. "It worked," Sirius cried, exhilarated, and the moment he spoke the outline faded. Dumbledore frowned, studying the cave wall. "Ah, so that's what it is," he murmured. "Crude, but effective." He turned to the others. "I think we must pay a price to pass." "A price?" Remus asked. "If I'm not mistaken, blood," Dumbledore said, with a hint of dismissal. "Whoever set this trap wanted to weaken their intruders. Very crude, but apparently satisfactory." He conjured a small knife and rolled up his sleeve. Before he could do anything with it, Sirius stepped forward, snatched the blade and slashed his forearm. Bright red blood welled up and dripped onto the stone. Vede opened his mouth as if to speak, then shut it. His armoire, what he called his wardrobe, contained a menagerie of magical creatures, gifts from Scamander and Stephen Morey, and a few he had picked up at the edge of other mazes. Sickly fledglings and broken beasts were frequent arrivals. Vede had meant to bring a larger animal to provide blood, but seeing Sirius's decision, he said nothing. Sometimes, sacrifice and the sight of living blood helped steady people against inner pain. Dumbledore did not stop Sirius. He whispered a soft spell. When Sirius's blood splattered the rock, the archway reappeared. The white light swallowed the stone, revealing a doorway of absolute black. "It's ready," Dumbledore said. He pointed his wand at the jagged wound on Sirius's arm, and the cut sealed as if it had never been there. Remus stepped forward, wand raised, and his light pushed a narrow cone into the cave. The rest followed. Beyond the arch lay a black lake, its surface like a mirror that refused to ripple. Remus's wand tip lit only a small patch. Elsewhere, the darkness felt heavy and physical, swallowing their light. "A vast subterranean lake under the cliff?" Remus said slowly. "Or is there an undetectable extension charm at work?" Dumbledore scanned the ceiling and sides of the cavern. "Perhaps both," he said. Far out on the lake's black skin, something gave a faint green glow, a small, stubborn point of light. "There's definitely something there," Sirius said, mounting his broom. "I'll fly out to investigate. If it's clear you can—" "Wait, Mr. Black." Veed held him back and, with a small flourish, released an old broom to test the route first. They watched as the scouting broom powered across the lake. Midway, it seemed to catch on an unseen web and then plunged. Pale, waterlogged hands burst from the surface and dragged it down with frantic, mechanical strength. "Inferi," Sirius breathed. Remus's face went white. Is this Lord Voldemort's army hidden here?" "An army?" Dumbledore corrected softly. "Guardians. They stand watch for him, ready to strike at any who intrude." "How pitiful," Remus said. "Even in death, they serve their master." Sirius made a sound of disgust. "Isn't that what all those dark arts people become, obsessed with corpses and decay?" Veed had been looking more carefully than the others. To most eyes, the lake was only a black sheet, but he could see a lattice of enchantments suspended over the water, wards that barred entrance from above so tightly not even a bird could pass. Only one hidden channel opened into the lake, and through it a green object extended deep beneath the surface. Beneath that, woven into the lake itself, was a powerful, insidious curse. Contact with the water leached strength until one died, and bodies that sank were slowly turned into inferi. The charm was beyond Vede's skill to fully unravel. In the center, a dense weave of magic rose like a pillar of golden light, eclipsing the green glow he had first noticed. Sirius and Remus skirted the lake's edge and eventually returned to report only more of the same. "Nothing but the lake," they said. Dumbledore looked at Veed. "And your conclusion?" "The way through is under the water," Vade said. "But we have time. We should deal with the inferi first, then examine the center." Dumbledore nodded. "Very well." Sirius crouched at the shore. "We can't drain the lake. Should we lure them out?" He glanced about. "But there are only 3 brooms left." "No need for brooms," Veed replied. He tapped his pack with his wand. A firebird burst out and perched on a crag, its head cocked as if curious. "Allow me to introduce Mihail, my magical companion," Vede said. Remus's tone held admiration. "Your transmutation skills grow ever finer." Dumbledore watched the bird with an almost private amusement in his eyes. Vede murmured a few words to Mihail. The firebird retracted its flames, spread its wings, and flew low over the water. Pale hands struck at it, seizing at talons as if they were prey, and let go as though seared. Sirius took advantage of the moment. With a flick, he hauled 2 inferi from the surface. They were a thin man and a woman in night clothes, eyes milky and faces washed of color. Their soaked garments clung to them like skin. Mihail spewed a concentrated jet of fire. The inferi were lifted onto the rocks and thrown into the blaze. Fiend fire, even restrained and directed, was more terrible than ordinary flame, and inferi, soulless and mindless, writhed briefly before falling still. The small, controlled fiend fire did not make monstrous shapes. To a casual eye, it might have looked like ordinary fire, but Dumbledore recognized it at once and watched the bird with evident approval. Emboldened, Mihail skimmed the lake again. The bird's surface gave off only the heat of a torch, but to the brainless creatures beneath the water, it was enough. They lunged and were hauled out, then tossed into the flames. Clearing the inferi became a grim, efficient routine. Sirius's wand work stayed rapid and sure, but a glassiness crept into his eyes. Another pale form exploded from the water and lunged for the bird. Sirius flicked a countercharm to drag it to shore, but something struck him as though a whip had cracked through his mind. There was a silent, internal thunder. His body went rigid, his thoughts blanked. He watched, numb, as the inferius was pulled toward the fire, and for a moment he was not present at all. Dumbledore noticed the faltering spell and intercepted the creature, catching it on a dry rock. Remus' jaw dropped. "It's him," he said, voice small. "Regulus." Veed and Sirius turned. The inferius that lay on the stone had the black family features in a painful, precise echo. A young man with Sirius's dark hair, clouded gray eyes, a face that might once have been handsome in a narrow, elegant way. It had stumbled from the water as if lost. For a long moment it stood there, then moved toward them with a slow, shuffling gait. Sirius's lips trembled. He had known for over a year that Regulus was gone. Pure blood circles had their ways of learning which names to cross off the family rolls, even when no body was found. Not long before Regulus's death, their father had died. The house and their mother Walburga had been shattered. Walburga's grief had become fury, then madness. She had sent Sirius howling letters filled with tears and curses, asking why it had not been him who died. Sirius had told himself he wasn't surprised when Regulus's name was marked deceased. Regulus had been fragile, foolishly idealistic, swept into things he could not bear. But to see the corpse with his own eyes, Regulus reanimated and reaching toward him, tore something loose in Sirius. 13 years of grief, he had not let himself feel crashed over him in an instant. The Inferius stood before him. Its hollowed, lifeless eyes made it worse than any news. "Regulus, what did Voldemort do to you?" Sirius whispered, and the sound broke. Two cold, bone-white hands gripped Sirius's shoulders and began to drag him toward the lake. "Sirius!" Remus shouted and hurled a spell. The Inferius flew backward, nearly toppling into the water. Veed shot out a rope of enchanted line from his wand and bound the reanimated body in tight loops. The corpse twisted and writhed, but ropes and magic held it. Inferi were dangerous when numerous, but alone they were clumsy. Sirius stood as if in a fog until Remus took his arm. "Sirius, are you all right?" I'm fine," he said, voice uneven. I knew he was dead. I just didn't expect." The color stained back into his limbs, and he forced himself to breathe. He pushed Remus's hand away and gripped his wand. "Let's continue." He forced his eyes back to the lake, pale hands slipping in and out of the black water, the endless surface disturbed by the constant, empty reaching. For a moment he steadied himself, and to his own surprise his voice came out calm and steady, calmer than he felt. Then they turned again toward the center, where the golden pillar of woven magic promised answers and perhaps more horrors. 190. The Prophecy and the Path. Miel circled the black lake, spitting fire now and then, or diving into the water and flying out again. After many repetitions, only shallow ripples broke the surface, then quickly subsided. "It seems the Inferi have all been eliminated, or their stiff brains finally learned to stay away from trouble," he said. Lupin glanced back. Only Regulus remained among Voldemort's Inferi, still moving weakly, ineffectively. "Sirius, Regulus," he began. "Burn him." Sirius lowered his arm and, without approaching his brother, said coldly, "I'll take his ashes to my mad mother." Lupin looked at Sirius's face, nearly ashen, and sighed helplessly. "Sirius, don't be so childish. The war ended more than a decade ago. Regulus clearly knew he'd made a mistake, even if he never got the chance to turn back. If you dispose of his body so quickly, you'll regret it one day. It's not a shame to admit if you're grieving your brother, Sirius." Sirius's lips trembled. He cast a quick, pained glance at the struggling Inferius, then looked away as if burned. Although he had been branded a traitor and a disgrace by his family and openly scorned the blacks, Sirius could not deny that he and Regulus had once been close. Before Sirius left for Gryffindor, Regulus had idolized him. The adoration had been clingy and sometimes infuriating. The forced indifference sagged from Sirius's face. He lowered his head, fingers clenching unconsciously, and said softly, pleading, "There's a magic that can dispel the necromancy in Inferi. Let the dead rest. Dumbledore." The white magic to lift necromancy was profound and costly, and among those present, only Dumbledore could cast it. In earlier wars, they had learned to repel or destroy Inferi, but had not spent the power to grant the dead a dignified end, partly because Voldemort's Inferi were usually Muggle corpses, and no one expected their own relatives to return as such. Now it had happened to Regulus, and even Sirius, who barely spoke to him in life, felt an acute grief at seeing his brother still driven on after death. Dumbledore could not refuse. "Once things here are concluded, I will dispel the necromancy for him," Dumbledore said gently. "Sirius, accepting the death of a loved one is a long and painful process. It's all right to be vulnerable. Cry if you must. We will help however we can. And I like to think Regulus is in a better place now, free from pain. If you meet again one day, I believe he will greet you with a smile." Viti walked slowly along the narrow path by the lake. To ordinary sight, there was nothing, but he saw a slither of green magic, moving like a line of small snakes. Lupin watched him reach out and grab at the air. The metal-sounding clink of chains followed. Suddenly, a thick, green copper chain shot from the water and snapped at Viti like a venomous serpent. Lupin raised his wand, an invisible barrier forming around Vede to repel the attack. The chain struck with a dull thud, reeled back a little, then reared up and struck again. A spell from the side hit the chain. It lost strength and fell, coiling as it pulled a small boat out of the lake. The boat glowed faintly green and glided toward the shore like a ghost. "Professor Dumbledore," Lupin said. Dumbledore nodded. "I quieted Regulus a little. Sirius is with him." Vede turned. Sirius hadn't used any light charm. All Vede could make out was a black silhouette, kneeling, squatting, or more like a huge black dog sitting perfectly still. Lupin had once told him that after Azkaban, Sirius had become somewhat afraid of darkness. Sirius always pretended otherwise, but he could not hide it from a werewolf with keen senses. Vede could not see the expression, but he felt the exhaustion of repeatedly losing those you loved. The small boat struck the bank with a soft bang. It was narrow and pointed at both ends, clearly meant for only one or two passengers. "Vede, you'll have to wait here," Lupin said. "Apparition won't work inside the lake. We'll have to reach the center by this boat. Dumbledore and I will go first. You should stay with Sirius." Vede began to protest, but Dumbledore spoke first. "No, Remus, I think perhaps you should stay." Lupin frowned. "Dumbledore, Vede is excellent, but he's only 12. I'm better suited to face unknown dangers." "It's not about who is more qualified," Dumbledore said calmly. "For Voldemort, what matters is how much magical power crosses this lake. I believe this boat is charmed to allow only one wizard at a time." "So Vede, he won't be counted. He's only 12. Next to my magic, his power is negligible." "Of course." Dumbledore seemed to see the slight blow that might land upon the proud young man, and smiled. "Voldemort could never imagine someone surpassing him in youth. He always made that mistake." "You flatter me, Professor." Vede didn't mind. His magic was very different from Dumbledore's, and admitting it was not shameful. Dumbledore had studied magic his whole life. If a student with barely 2 years' experience could easily overtake him, that would be a much greater underestimation. The two climbed into the boat. The enchantment stabilized it. It did not tip, though there was no room to sit, so Vede simply stood. A warm hand rested on his shoulder as Dumbledore steadied him. Vede felt awkward, but did not resist the old man's kindness. "Be careful," Lupin warned. "I'll wait here the whole time. If anything happens, I'll find a way to reach you immediately." "It should be safe enough to simply take the boat," Vede replied. "Voldemort would need to travel this way too." "If there's any uncertainty, come back first," Lupin said. "We don't have to solve everything today." Vede nodded. Dumbledore heard the sentiment aimed partly at himself and felt a new, unfamiliar twinge. This was the first time someone had openly questioned his ability to protect another. He understood Lupin's worry was not distrust of him, but a fierce desire to protect the child, Vede like a parent guarding a beloved jewel. The boat set off on its own, steering a straight course toward the green light at the center of the lake and leaving fan-shaped ripples. The lake bottom was a black void. Only the light from Dumbledore's wand scattered across the water like distant stars. Mihail alighted on the bow and peered around, occasionally spreading his wings and spitting 2 small flames into the lake, as if hoping for any mist in fairy to emerge. Vede almost laughed at the bird's mischief. Dumbledore watched the firebird. His eyes reflected its golden glow. "A very unique life," he said. "Where did you find it?" "In the old Gunter Manor," Vede answered. "I didn't find it. I made it." Dumbledore fell silent for a few seconds. "Created?" "Life alchemy," Vede said. "It's forbidden magic, an accidental product of experiments." He didn't try to hide it. Lying to Dumbledore would be worse. He briefly recounted the events of the day, emphasizing the figure struggling in the fiend fire and attacking them, omitting only that Mihail had found the resurrection stone. Dumbledore's interest deepened as he asked a few more questions, then sank into thought. The boat parted the dark water in near silence. "You omitted something," Dumbledore observed finally. "Why?" Vede hesitated, then shook his head. Dumbledore's eyes were not surprised. He spoke softly instead, as if to remind rather than reproach. "Among wizards, some can glimpse the future. Our divination professor Sybil Trelawney inherited something of Cassandra Trelawney. There are stronger seers. Gellert Grindelwald could see fragments of what was to come. Prophecy both aids and ruins a man. It can blind him to things more important than life or death." Veedy stared. A gentle pity lay in Dumbledore's look. Veed, I don't know how much you've seen. Don't overestimate prophecy, and don't fall into fatalism. Prophecy can guide, but only you decide the direction of your future. The boat bumped the smooth stone of a tiny island and stopped. A single stone pillar rose in the center, topped by a stone basin emitting a pale green light. Dumbledore stepped off first and surveyed their surroundings, then called, Vady. Vade's thoughts snapped back. He followed and stood beside the old principal, watching the basin. He felt both surprised and unsurprised. Dumbledore had known, at least in part, what he had seen. Prophecy. What did it change compared to what he already knew? The future glimpsed by a seer could shift with the observer's actions. The storylines he had learned seemed to have fixed endings, but he had already meddled with those plots and planned to change more. When people come into a world, they want to leave something behind. This second life had been given to him. Peace would be the best return. Veedy walked toward the stone basin with that thought in his chest. Thanks for the support, siblings. Your leaf has finally gotten the second badge. Inside the stone basin lay a pool of emerald green liquid, its surface perfectly smooth. Professor Dumbledore reached out, but his hand could not touch it. He ran a few complex spells to examine it, murmuring quietly for a long moment before withdrawing his wand. Turning to Veed, who watched in silence beside him, Dumbledore said, This liquid cannot be separated or scooped out, nor can it be banished or transfigured with spells. You can't even put a hand in it. Under those conditions, Veed, how do you suppose we learn its secrets? He asked. Drink it, Veed replied. Dumbledore nodded. Indeed, that is the only way. When Regulus attacked Sirius earlier, Dumbledore continued, I saw traces of a curse on him, identical to whatever is in this basin. Veed whispered, He must have drunk a great deal of this before he died. Voldemort does not regard his followers as companions, Dumbledore said, his voice heavy, to treat a young man who once showed loyalty that way. He let the sentence trail off, shaking his head with pity. A stemmed crystal goblet appeared in his hand. Veed frowned. You're not thinking of drinking it yourself, Professor? I want to see its effects, Dumbledore said lightly. Compared to you, my magic resists the harm of the dark arts better, and I think Voldemort probably wouldn't want to kill anyone who comes to this island outright. So you risk yourself on a guess? Veedy objected. Why not move the basin and deal with it somewhere else? I'm afraid we can't, Veed, Dumbledore replied. I think you've noticed. The basin, the stone pillars, everything on this island is integrated with the lake and the cave. Unless we can move every object in the cave at once, we can't take the stone basin out. We don't need to risk ourselves, Veed said again. We could have a heinous criminal drink it. There are plenty in Muggle prisons. Dumbledore regarded him with a long look. Doesn't that offend your sense of morality? Veedy answered calmly. Professor, I don't have your brand of righteousness. If someone must be sacrificed, I'd choose a criminal before someone I know. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. No, Veed, you misjudge me. I don't have great pity for every condemned man. I've seen too many innocent lives destroyed, and I am not without guilt myself, but I cannot believe it is right to sacrifice others for one's own ends, even if they are bad people. The weight of life is far greater than we imagine, he went on. Even killing for a supposedly righteous purpose damages the soul. Voldemort scoffs at such things. He fears death, yet treats other lives as worthless. He is wrong, Veed. He has committed a terrible mistake. His own soul is full of holes. Veed thought of Horcruxes, and then realized Dumbledore meant more, that the act of killing had already warped Voldemort's soul long before any Horcrux was made. Dumbledore looked at him as if he were a gifted but unsettled child whose sense of right and wrong could still be shaped. He was watching. Dumbledore would not choose the easiest, cheapest way if it meant sacrificing others. Veed sighed. I understand, but I'd still like to try my method if you don't mind. Very well, Dumbledore said. Veedy opened his bag, and a serious-faced little figure leaped out. It landed the size of a palm, and then, under an engorgement charm, quickly grew until it was as tall as Dumbledore. After kneeling once in salute, the enchanted doll silently took the crystal goblet from Dumbledore and tossed it back, downing the contents in one gulp. Veed looked to the stone basin. The liquid's level did not seem to move. A second goblet, a third. After 5 or 6, the doll's movements slowed until he finally sighed. "It tastes terrible." The words barely left his mouth before his head drooped and his body became rigid, as if turned to stone. Vidi prodded him. There was no response. The magical sigils etched across the doll's body were scrambled, and even the properties of the material seemed altered. Even if Vedi tried to reinfuse him with consciousness, he could not be made to move again. Vidi and Dumbledore exchanged a look. V then opened his wardrobe and stepped through. A moment later he returned, leading a plump gray pig. "A pig?" Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Veed said. "Not one of Hagrid's ordinary breeds. It's said to have 1/16 warthog blood, so it carries a touch of magic." Veed stroked the piglet's sharp ears and its broad, flat snout. Then he hesitated. "Professor Dumbledore, transfiguration can turn people into animals, but can it turn animals into people?" Dumbledore was surprised by the question, then answered, "Magic can do that, yes. But after transfiguration, its essence remains that of a warthog." "That's perfect," Veed said. "If it truly became a person, I wouldn't have the heart to do it. But I suspect this potion may require a human, or at least a humanoid creature to drink." Dumbledore considered this, then acquiesced. "All right." He pointed his wand at the piglet, and light wrapped the animal as it struggled in panic. Its limbs elongated, its snout and ears shrank, its tail disappeared, and within seconds a plump man in a gray robe sat where the pig had been. His bald head had a fringe of thin yellow hair, and his small black eyes still held panic. His mouth was wide and flat, as if it could swallow a child whole. His limbs were short and thick, and his belly bulged. He no longer looked like a pig so much as a toadish spirit made human, squatting on the ground. "Umph, oink," he uttered, a strange hybrid cry. Veed cast an engorgement charm on the goblet, scooping out a cup almost half the size of the basin. But when the cup left the water, the potion in the basin remained at its original height, as if nothing had been removed. He forced the toadman the pig had been transformed into to drink the potion in the cup. After training with various insects, Vade's Confundus charm was very well honed. He easily made the pig believe what was in the cup was its favorite food, and it gulped it down in a few greedy noises. As it swallowed, the liquid level in the stone basin finally began to fall, but it dropped only a little, far less than the amount the pig had drunk. "Remarkable," Dumbledore breathed, surprised that the trick had actually worked at all. Veed looked slightly dissatisfied. "It's decreased less than I expected." "Perhaps the magic inside it is too weak," Dumbledore said. "Maybe only true magic can digest it." "But the puppet has magic too," Veedy protested. "Its magic isn't innate, but spells that were placed on it." "Maybe it did decrease just now," Dumbledore speculated, "but the amount was too small, too little to overcome whatever automatic replenishment keeps the potion full in the basin." Veedy poured a second cup down the pig's throat. By the third cup, the Confundus began to lose its hold. The animal resisted strongly for a few seconds before being forced to drink. It rolled on the floor, screaming in pain, and the transfiguration charm Dumbledore had used began to fail. Bits of its limbs shifted back toward their original form, making its appearance even more gruesome. Then abruptly, it calmed. Dumbledore intervened. He made the pig finish the 4th, 5th, and 6th cups, and then stopped. Reverted completely, it lay on the floor breathing weakly, as if it had little time left. Dumbledore lowered his wand. "It still has a chance to be cured now. If this continues, there will only be death." "There are pork chops and lamb chops on the dining table," Vade reminded him. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "but killing other animals for survival is different from killing a creature who has aided us, my boy." "All right, you've convinced me," Vede shrugged. "Luckily, I have many animals." He stepped back into the wardrobe space. 2 Occamy hatchlings played under a tree, a female puppet tended a bowtruckle clinging to a branch, and a broom chased a swooping evil that had ripped off some twigs. Everywhere was life and noise. Veedy walked through, setting a young fooper that had landed on his shoulder back on a branch. These creatures had been gifts from friends. He would not sacrifice them to drink poison. But there were animals in the wardrobe he'd kept for other purposes. He moved a large stone aside and revealed a building like a prison, ringed by high walls and sealed with barbed wire and spells. He opened the door, and the creatures inside, after a moment's dazed stare, surged toward the opening with clicking mandibles. A group of man-eating acromantulas poured out, 8 thick, hairy legs, huge chelicerae tapping as their 8 eyes fixed on Veed, eager to tear him apart. When he'd first collected them, they'd been only the size of a basketball. They grew fast. Now each was larger than a goat. They reproduced fiercely, laying 100 eggs at a time. If they hadn't been confined by magic to that enclosure, the wardrobe would long since have been theirs. Because the space and food were limited, they kept their numbers down, no more than 50 at most. Veedy flicked his wand, pulling control of the fastest, most aggressive spiders, shrinking them and bringing them out. A spider behind him spat a web, trying to snare him. An invisible armor sprang into being and blocked the sticky thread. Veed slammed the large door shut. The sealing charm flared. Above them, a chirping sound cut through. Mihail folded his wings and swooped down, slipping through the narrow gaps in the wire to land on the acromantula that had struck at Veedy. Fire spread from his body, burning the spider. It screamed and collapsed into a pile of black ash. Mihail raised his head, flapped his wings, and gave a defiant cry at the spiders far larger than he was. The remaining spiders scattered, shrinking into the corners. Vita grinned, turned the stone into a box, loaded a few shrunken and petrified spiders inside, and left the wardrobe space. "Professor," he said, opening the box and showing Dumbledore, "I think these should work too. Acromantulas are truly magical creatures, classified by the Ministry with a danger rating of XXXXX, the same tier as dragons and dementors. They were not comparable to a pig, with only a trace of a magical bloodline." The liquid level in the stone basin began to fall at a clearly visible rate. The last spider, unable to withstand the potion's power, collapsed to the floor, its 8 legs twitching. At the same time, the golden locket in the basin finally revealed its true form. Veed sent several acromantulas back into their enclosure. When he returned, Dumbledore had already retrieved the locket and was studying it closely. "Professor?" Veed prompted. "Ah, Veed." Dumbledore set the locket down. "I'm afraid I think we found the wrong target." He opened his palm so Veed could see the locket's exterior. "As far as I know, Lord Voldemort did possess a golden locket that once belonged to Slytherin, and it bore an unmistakable S mark. This one has nothing of the sort." "It's not entirely nothing," Dumbledore said. "It's the last trace left in this world by a brave man." He opened the locket. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment. Veedy unfolded it and read a sentence he knew well. "To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be killed. R.A.B." "R.A.B.," Dumbledore murmured. "Regulus Arcturus Black. He was not killed by his master. He died resisting Lord Voldemort." 193. Nirvana Veed noticed that Regulus, in his final testament, had named Lord Voldemort's greatest secret, the Horcrux. He hadn't discussed it with Dumbledore before. Even someone like Slughorn would be unnerved if a student mentioned Horcruxes. Perhaps Dumbledore would gain something from their experience at the Gaunt House. Whether he had suspected it before or not, this would confirm it. Dumbledore seemed to have arrived at the same conclusion. "Horcruxes." He sighed, then said to Veedy, "I've long wondered what kept Lord Voldemort from dying. There are several branches of magic that could do it, but in the end he chose the vilest, the Horcrux." "It has to do with the soul," Veed said. "He split his soul," Dumbledore replied without hiding anything. "He tore off a fragment and sealed it in an object, a Horcrux. So even if his body is destroyed, a part of him remains anchored to this world, searching for a way back. But living like that is worse than death," he added. "If he can't return, he won't be accepted by the world of the dead, nor can he truly live. The fragment grows weaker, forgets itself, and dissipates in endless torment." Veed nodded, showing neither greed nor shock. Dumbledore continued bluntly, "When we burned the Gaunt residence with fiendfire, an evil shadow rose from the flames." "Yes," Veed nodded. "If I'm not mistaken, that was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Very clever. He hid a piece of himself in a ruined place no one would think to check." Dumbledore's voice carried both admiration and disgust. "Actually, that wasn't our first experience with this," Veed said. "No?" Dumbledore paused. "I found an old diadem in the Room of Requirement. Veed said. It resembled Ravenclaw's diadem, but it was corrupted by dark magic. Remus, Michael, and I burned it in a cave. Dumbledore fell silent for a long moment. In the stone basin, the green potion slowly began to refill. If the locket were still inside, only a tiny sliver of gold would be visible now. Let's go back. Remus must be getting impatient, Dumbledore said. They stepped into the small enchanted boat, which carried them toward the shore. Dumbledore's tone turned serious. Veed, don't tell anyone about the Horcruxes. Yes, Professor. Is the diadem still with you? I'll bring it back to school, Veed said. But it was burned by fiend fire. There may be little left. Magic leaves traces even after great destruction, Dumbledore said. I presume you found something else at the Gaunt place besides other things? A ring, Professor, Veed admitted. But I think it's better if I keep it. Dumbledore's eyes widened. He seemed about to say more, then swallowed it, looking instead into Veed's bright gray eyes. Very well, if you have your reasons. The boat bumped against the shore. Lupin reached out and hauled Veed up, scanning them both until he saw they were all right and relaxed. You were gone a long time. Did you find anything? Some unusual things, Dumbledore said, glancing at Sirius nearby. It concerns Regulus. He drew the golden locket from his pocket. Professor Remus, Veed said suddenly, may I go back to the school first? Is something urgent? Lupin asked. No, not urgent. Veed hesitated, then looked at Dumbledore. Perhaps Fawkes could bring Harry? Veedy did not want to witness Sirius in pieces if he learned the truth about Regulus. Sirius loved intensely and simply. If his grief broke him, Veed would prefer someone steadier than Dumbledore's gentle hands to comfort him. Dumbledore shook his head. No, if Harry were here, he would force himself to be strong. Today we should give him a place where he can be weak. I understand. Without any visible movement, the Phoenix Fawkes appeared, landing on Veed's shoulder. It shed a few loose feathers. Veedy caught them casually, then said farewell to Lupin. Professor Dumbledore can explain everything to you, Remus. If you need help, I'll be there. Thank you. Lupin watched as Veed and Fawkes disappeared in a golden-red flash. In an instant, Veedy was back at Hogwarts, in Dumbledore's office. Fawkes settled on its gilded perch, looking exhausted and listless. Veedy asked softly, You're going to renew, aren't you? Fawkes did not speak. It arched its neck, suddenly burst into flames with a shriek, and turned into a pile of ashes. The sound stirred the portraits. A thin, irritable head in one frame scowled. Hey, student, how did you get in? This is the headmaster's office. No one may enter without permission. Leave at once. The other portraits agreed. Veed answered calmly, I'm here because Dumbledore permitted it. Is there any other reason? The slender portrait bristled, and the others mocked him for his rudeness. Veed glanced at the name beneath the portrait. Phineas Black, Sirius and Regulus's great-great-grandfather, and apparently one of Hogwarts's most unpopular headmasters. He sat cross-legged beside the ash pile, waiting for the phoenix to be reborn. Phineas squinted at Veed. Dumbledore said you're the most outstanding Ravenclaw student in nearly a century. Is that true? What feats have you done? His tone was smug. Veed raised an eyebrow. The expression left Phineas suddenly uneasy. Why do I feel like you're mocking me? Please don't make it hard for the student, a nearby portrait chided. Phineas pushed his way through another frame to get closer, leaning on the opposite portrait. You were out today. It wasn't about my good-for-nothing great-grandson, was it? Veed answered quietly. No, it was the other Black. Regulus? Phineas's mocking mask vanished. The room went silent. The portraits held their breaths. From the ashes, a tiny, wrinkled chick pecked its way out. Bare and ungainly, it stretched its scrawny wings and explored the world with surprising vigor. Veedy wondered if the phoenix retained any memories of its previous life. Was it the same bird? How should I care for it? He asked the portraits. Does it need food? After a pause, an old portrait finally spoke. Dumbledore knew it would be reborn soon and left preparations. See the green crystal vial on the cabinet? Give it 3 drops. Veedy found the bottle sitting by Fawkes's perch. It smelled faintly of bamboo leaves. He fed the chick the potion. It opened its mouth eagerly, as if bottomless. 3 drops were enough. Phineas watched and then asked, Regulus, how did he die? He died for his conscience and his beliefs, Veed said. He resisted Voldemort and gave his life so others might have a chance to defeat him. Phineas snorted with displeasure. Sounds less like a true black and more like a foolish Gryffindor. With that insult, he stormed back into his frame, leaving an empty space. Vade took the box containing the diadem from his bag. He had borrowed it again from the Room of Requirement when he decided Dumbledore should see it. This time, Barnabas hadn't stopped him. He set the diadem on an empty table. "This is for Professor Dumbledore. Tell him when he returns." "Very well," said the portrait. Vade left the headmaster's office. Evening had fallen. Students returning from Hogsmeade drifted through the corridors. From a high landing, he noticed two students tucked in a corner, close and giggling, Michael and Padma. Padma blushed while Michael moved like someone practiced in such things, whispering and retreating, then leaning in again. Vade couldn't help smiling at their precocity. He still pictured them as children in his mind, despite everything. He descended the spiral staircase, thinking of the day's events, his frank talk with Dumbledore, the Inferi, the two Black brothers, and the Phoenix rebirth. Phoenix feathers and tears were priceless. He planned to brew healing potions and use the rest in alchemy. Thanks to Fawkes, he had more than enough feathers. "Mr. Gray, Vede Gray," a tiny voice called. He turned. Mackie, the house elf who cooked and cleaned the Slytherin common room, stood there wringing his hands. Vede knelt. "Mackie, what's the matter?" "Mackie wants to tell Master Vade something," the elf whispered, embarrassed to disclose house gossip, but still unafraid because Vede was a student of Hogwarts. "Tonight, not many Slytherins were here. Most went to Hogsmeade." "And?" Vede prompted. "Two big people tried a spell. Their magic was poor, and they accidentally conjured a cow. It almost broke their ribs." Vede frowned. "An accidental cow?" The levitation charm gone wrong was a strange, rare result. Mackie blinked and lowered his voice further. "Mackie doesn't understand, but Mackie saw strange things. Someone's practicing dark magic in secret, and there is an outside house elf sleeping in his dormitory." Draco Malfoy had been having a rough time lately. The trouble had started last semester, ever since he and a group of classmates tried to ambush Vade Grey of Ravenclaw and were driven off by a swarm of bugs that had scared him nearly to tears. After that incident, people were less willing to follow him. This term, his friends were dropping away one by one. Even Crabbe and Goyle, the two idiots he'd always counted on, had begun to argue with him openly. The Quidditch team had once been a source of status. His father had donated a batch of brooms, and everyone had fawned over him. But as Seeker, he'd lost the match to Gryffindor. The snitch had passed right by him, and he hadn't caught it. Harry Potter had seized the chance. Draco felt he'd been wronged. Potter had pretended to hook him off his broom to distract him, and his teammates wouldn't hear a word of Draco's explanation. Flint sneered, "That snitch practically shoved itself under your nose. What else did it have to do to get your attention?" Montague and Bletchley laughed. Derek added, "A good seeker needs a good broom and a good pair of eyes, doesn't he, Draco?" Draco had always thought Potter the most annoying person alive for scoffing at him, but now, faced with the real malice of his peers, Potter's mockery seemed almost trivial. He slammed his book shut, the leather cover shrieked, and the title, Darkest Magic, seemed to stain red as if bleeding. He wiped at his fingers the same way he had the first time he'd used those spells, but there was no longer the same disgust. "So they've got the wrong target," he muttered. Beside him, Dobby, his house elf, dressed in a tattered pillowcase, bowed. The elf's large ears looked singed, and his forehead and thin arms were scarred. In a high, nervous voice, Dobby said, "Dobby did not know Master Malfoy was unhappy. Dobby attacked Harry Potter to help Master." "Humph," Draco sneered. "If Father really wanted to help, he'd take back the brooms he donated to the team." Dobby's wide, tennis ball eyes blinked. "Master thinks that cannot be done. It would damage the House of Malfoy's image." "Never mind. I've already had my revenge." Draco patted Darkest Magic with a small, satisfied smile. "Two spells, and those fools were running in circles. They still don't know what hit them." He shoved pictures of his dormmates off the table, turning them face down and stamping on them. He straightened his collar and looked down at the house elf. "I'll go see my injured roommates. You clean this place. Don't go out and be seen. Don't let me catch you." He put his wand away, hid the spell book, slammed the door, and left for the infirmary. Several of his dormmates had been sent there. Crabbe and Goyle had attacked others unable to cast protective charms, ended up with bloody heads after the counterspells. Thinking of their current misery brightened Draco's mood a little. Finally, some justice, he thought. Dobby watched him go, then shuffled to the door and reached for the knob. His hand trembled. "Don't run out!" Draco's casual words were law to him. He snatched his hand back, then, in a frenzy of contrition, slammed his head against the wall. Bad Dobby, trying to disobey master's orders." He struck himself a few times, then steadied, bowed, and set to cleaning. The dormitory looked like a battlefield. Overturned chairs, ripped curtains, rumpled sheets and cushions. Draco had let his anger loose, but he had not used the dark arts in the common room, so Dobby's work was mostly physical and quick to fix. When he finished, his stomach growled. He stared at the snacks on the table, but dared not take any. The Malfoys did not starve him deliberately. They simply never considered that feeding their slave might matter. Dobby had once stolen something called gloom grass from the Malfoy family storehouse and left traces. That was how people had learned he'd been the one who'd attacked Harry Potter in the maze. No one thought he'd done it to protect someone nearly killed. Draco and Lucius assumed he'd acted because he'd overheard Draco complaining and wanted to help. Lucius had punished Dobby for acting without permission, but both Malfoys still liked to think their house elf was loyal and eager. When Draco later told his father that he was being bullied at school, Lucius arranged for Dobby to be sent to Hogwarts as a kind of guardian. As a school governor, Lucius could have his elf bypass the castle's protections. Once at Hogwarts, Dobby's movements were severely restricted. Draco ordered him not to leave the dormitory without permission, to return quickly after errands, and never to be seen by other students or house elves. Draco also forbade the castle house elves from entering his rooms or touching his things. Dobby became, in Draco's mind, just another possession to be hidden away. Draco took comfort in the thought that school rules were meaningless if he willed them away. He imagined himself above the staff and the protections of the castle. Stupid, he thought smugly. He did not notice that among the fawning house elves, there were those who watched and listened more closely than he guessed. The student didn't let Mackie clean the dormitory, but Mackie heard it, Mackie told Vidi Gray later, showing his large ears. Mackie hears the best. Mackie can hear very far. Thank you, Mackie, Veed said. I'll find a way to speak with that house elf. Mackie must be careful, the elf warned solemnly. That house elf has strong magic, stronger than Mackie. I'll be careful, Veed paused, thinking. Mackie, among the castle's house elves, whose magic is the strongest? Relf, Mackie answered immediately. He is oldest, over 160 years old. He tells us what to do. Veed's interest sharpened. Relf must be the steward of the house elves, the one who organized them, who had taught them and seen much of history. House elves could live to 200, but many were worn down by poor treatment and never reached that age. The thought of speaking with someone who had seen so much excited Veed. The next day, the news of the Slytherin brawl spread around Hogwarts. It was surprising. Slytherin was notorious for its internal discipline and for hiding its fights from other houses. Students from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw swarmed the infirmary on flimsy excuses, headaches, trouble sleeping, anxiety, hoping to glimpse the Slytherins in their beds. Most of the second years were there, 2 first years as well. The Slytherins drew their curtains, but the Gryffindors peered and made a show of being dizzy and delighted. Madame Pomfrey had to chase the crowd off. Draco arrived to visit his roommates, partly to savor their discomfort. He paused when a group of Gryffindors, arm in arm and laughing loudly, passed down the corridor. He stood in the doorway, watching students come and go until Madame Pomfrey finally cleared them. A heavy hand landed on his shoulder. See, Draco, whispered Foley, a 6th year, his voice low. Why must Slytherins be divided? If we splinter among ourselves, our enemies mock us from above. No one gives sympathy. No one helps. What do you mean? Draco asked, frowning. Yaxley nearby said coldly, when you hurt your own, you may feel a quick satisfaction. Foley continued, but later you find you are the one being mocked and despised. Because you're Slytherin, someone muttered. Because we're Slytherin, Foley agreed. Admit it, Draco. We're from Slytherin. For many, that's original sin. Even if the Sorting Hat chose us, through 7 years at school and in the rest of our lives, No one will defend us from the unfairness we face, Yaxley said. Haven't you heard? People say Slytherins are born evil. To restore Slytherin's honor, to restore the glory of pure-blood wizards, Foley went on, we mustn't bicker among ourselves. We must unite and fight for what we're owed. They all spoke in low, heated voices. Draco had come to gloat, but their words began to strike a chord. He found himself asking, before he knew why, "So what should we do?" They exchanged looks, and one of them smiled. "Come with me, Draco." Foley put an arm around Draco's shoulder as they walked away, surrounded by other Slytherins. "To face reality, we formed a club," he said softly. "Like-minded people, I think you might want to join." They slipped around a corner, leaving the corridor suddenly empty. Veed watched them go, frowning. "All right," he murmured to himself. "You've only read one novel after all. You can't possibly know everything about this world." The good news was that if Draco had been taken off to some club, he probably wouldn't be back at the dormitory for a while. Perfect for Veed's plan to meet Dobby. He walked down the corridor a few steps, then called, "Mackie?" A small form appeared from behind a pillar. Mackie peeked out and whispered, "I am here, Veed Grey." "Could you listen to what they said for me?" Veed asked quietly. "This isn't an order. If it makes you uncomfortable, don't worry about it." Mackie's voice softened. "Is Veed Grey worried they will do bad things?" Veed nodded. "How did Voldemort gather his earliest Death Eaters?" he asked, naming the one word that made Mackie tremble. "Mackie understands, Veed Grey," Mackie bowed. 195. Vader and Dobby Vede followed a few Slytherin students as they headed downstairs. He didn't know them well, only that they were fourth years. "I can't believe those two idiots, Crabbe and Goyle, actually pulled something like that off," a girl said. "I thought they couldn't even manage a Lumos." "They actually have decent practical skills," another boy replied. "They both passed their exams last term, at least better than Flint." A few of them chuckled softly. Marcus Flint was the Quidditch captain, tall and burly, but he was only any good at Quidditch. His other classes were a mess. In the Owls, Flint had barely scraped a level in Charms that allowed him to continue studying. He was a 7th year this year, and Professor Flitwick had warned him that, at his current level, passing his final exams would be difficult. The more pressure Flint felt, the more he threw himself into Quidditch, where he could still feel competent. At this rate, failing a year looked almost inevitable. Slytherins used to joke when someone did something dumb, "Your brain belongs in Hufflepuff." Lately, though, the joke had shifted. "Did you turn into Flint?" The joke stayed inside Slytherin. They laughed for a moment longer, then stopped in front of a damp, empty stone wall. "Pure blood," the lead boy murmured. A hidden stone door slowly opened, and they filed in one by one. The last girl couldn't help looking back as the door closed. It seemed to her that today the stone slid shut a little more slowly than usual, but she wasn't entirely sure. She wasn't very sensitive to time. "Come sit down, Paige," her companion called, and Paige went to the sofa. "What are your plans for the holidays?" the student beside her asked. Conversation drifted to homework, holiday schemes, and love triangles. Veedy, still under a disillusionment charm, took in his surroundings. The Slytherin common room was underground and, unlike some other houses, didn't use an undetectable extension charm. It felt long and low, with rough stone walls and a ceiling like a dungeon. The round chandelier cast a greenish light that made the room feel darker and more ominous. Students had to light candles to do their homework. Yet the fireplace and the tables and chairs were exquisitely carved, almost too delicate for such a grim space. Through the narrow windows, the Black Lake lay dark and murky. If the sun had been out, creatures might have been visible in the water, but today it was only a sullen expanse. Veed paused, sensing a slight tug at his fingertips. He followed the pull into another dim, damp stone corridor. Both sides were lined with closed wooden doors. It looked even more like a prison. Even Slytherin students wouldn't want to stay in such an oppressive place long. The corridor was empty and desolate. Mackie, also hidden by a disillusionment charm, led Vade to a wooden door and stopped, whispering, "This is the dormitory. Mackie isn't allowed in." "Is he still inside?" Vade asked. "Yes," Mackie said. Vade touched the doorknob with his wand. It clicked. He pushed the door open and stepped in. Dobby, having finished cleaning the room, was starving and crouched under the bed. He missed Crab and Goyle a little. Although his young master now loathed them, when those two were around, there was always food in the dormitory. Even if some went missing, nobody noticed. Dobby had been counting the time. His young master would be back soon, he thought, and had followed the command. Don't let me be seen, by hiding. But in such a small dormitory, there were few good hiding places. Dobby couldn't shrink himself into a jar. Under the bed was the only place roomy enough that he didn't have to fold himself into knots. He tried to wait out the difficult hours. Suddenly, Dobby heard the door open and thought it was his master. Footsteps followed, but then something felt wrong. He couldn't risk being discovered, so he stayed hidden. The intruder, however, didn't linger at the doorway. The black shoes crossed the room and paused at the bed. Someone crouched and pulled back the bed curtain. "Hello, Dobby?" the voice said. Dobby's eyes went wide. He tried to leap up too quickly and smacked his head on the underside of the bed with a bang. Tears sprang to his eyes from the pain. Sorry, I seem to have startled you," the visitor said, stepping back a pace and leaving space. "What are you doing hiding under the bed? Come out." Dobby hesitated a moment, then crawled out and stood awkwardly beside the bed, clutching the green curtains as if they might protect him. Of course, he recognized the student. During the summer, Dobby had tried to get Harry Potter expelled. He had caused trouble, and Harry had been locked up by his Muggle relatives. It was this student and another grown wizard who had taken Harry Potter away. Dobby had snuck into the school several times, hoping to force Harry to leave, and had often seen them together. He'd even heard his name mentioned by both his master and the young master, Veed Grey. He had created several inventions at a young age and had become the favorite student of the alchemist Mori. Even Dumbledore had high hopes for him. Though Draco Malfoy disliked him, Draco still bought his inventions, so many that he kept several different sets, including limited edition versions. He'd even bought the soft light badge in complete sets, changing which he wore each day according to his mood. For noble wizards who cared about appearance and status, to go out without a badge appropriate to one's rank was as shameful as being naked, except they would still secretly use the badges while grumbling about the inventor. How had Veed Grey managed to sneak into the dormitory? Dobby glanced at him nervously. "I've heard Harry talk about you, Dobby," Veed said softly. "So you're a Malfoy family house elf? Did you act on your master's orders?" "Of course not," Dobby cried, his voice high and frantic. "Dobby must protect Harry Potter. Someone at Hogwarts is plotting, and before they strike, Harry Potter cannot stay here. Harry Potter must go home. Veed Grey must not stop Dobby." One more update to come. 196. Free will. Veed knew this house elf was stubborn, so instead of badgering Dobby about Harry Potter's safety, he asked gently, "I heard Harry say you wanted to be free?" Dobby's excited expression froze. He slowly lowered his arms, his big eyes darting about in panic. "Don't be afraid. I won't tell Malfoy," Veed said seriously. "If you truly want it, I can help." Help Dobby?" Dobby sniffed, his voice trembling. "Why, sir? Dobby is a slave. Dobby doesn't know you, and you don't know Dobby." "Why?" Veedy chuckled softly. "Maybe because you're the first house elf I've met who actually speaks about wanting freedom. Tell me, do you want it? Do you want me to help?" Dobby clutched his ragged pillowcase with both hands, his whole body shaking. After a long moment, he closed his eyes and cried out, "Yes! Dobby longs for freedom. Dobby wants to leave his house forever." He seemed startled by his own boldness. Then, tentative and terrified, he added, "But my master won't give Dobby freedom. The family is careful. They won't even give Dobby a pair of socks." Veedy nodded. The rule was simple but harsh. A house elf is freed only if their master intentionally gives them clothing as a gift or for safekeeping. Clothes tossed to the floor, left in the laundry, or handed over to be washed didn't count. The master's intent mattered. "You don't have to worry about that," Veed said. "I'll figure something out. Do you trust me?" Dobby looked up, after a long, searching stare, nodded. "Yes, Dobby trusts you." It was the first wizard who had crouched down to talk to him eye to eye. Veed smiled. "Then be patient. It won't be long." He hadn't finished when a soft, grumbling sound interrupted them. Dobby clutched his stomach, clearly hungry. Veedy glanced at the platter of sweets and pastries on a nearby table and made a decision. "Mackie, could you bring us some food?" With a quiet poof, a round tray appeared on the floor. On it were bread, baked potatoes, fried sausages, and a large bottle of black tea. "Thank you, Mackie," Veedy said, pushing the tray toward Dobby. "Eat quickly. Malfoy might be back soon." He added in a normal voice, "Mackie is the house elf who looks after the Slytherin common room. Even though your master doesn't allow him into the dormitories, Mackie can bring you things if needed, or pass messages to me. He'll hear them." Dobby stared, lips trembling, but he didn't touch the steaming food. Veed rose. "Goodbye, Dobby. I hope the next time we meet, you'll be a free elf." He tapped his wand to his temple and disappeared. Dobby heard footsteps fade down the corridor, the wooden door click shut, and then silence. As Veedy left the common room and walked down the empty corridor, Mackie appeared beside him. "Veedy Grey is going to help that house elf gain freedom?" he asked softly. "Yes," Veed replied. "I saw how cruel his master is." "I don't like him," Mackie said after a moment. Then, more quietly, "He's strange, like an anomaly." "Because he seeks freedom?" Veda guessed. Mackie shook his head. "He betrayed his master." He frowned as if the phrase didn't quite fit and corrected himself. "He obeys on the surface, but in truth he's betraying them. No one accepts such an elf. He'll become a homeless ghost, wandering until he dies. I will give him a better life if he escapes," Veed said calmly. "That's why I'm helping." Mackie was taken aback. Dobby is a bad elf who will betray his master. Does Mackie think that was wrong? Mackie wanted to say yes, of course he did, but he hesitated. He'd never witnessed everything personally, but he knew how Draco Malfoy treated Dobby. Dobby punished himself cruelly, burning his fingers on an iron, sometimes holding his ears to the oven to bake them, and in the dead of night, tearing discarded clothes into strips to use as bandages. Mackie was unsettled by the whole picture. Vetti didn't press him for a quick answer. Instead, he asked, "Did he eat the food you sent?" "He's crying," Mackie said, "crying terribly." "Then help him, Mackie," Veed said softly. "Send him food every day. I've left burn ointment and some white moss at the umbrella house. Take 2 bottles and send them to him too." "All right." Mackie's voice sounded reluctant but resigned. "Since Veed Grey says so, Mackie can help. But Mackie is not like him. Mackie will not betray." "I know," Veed said. He thought about how Malfoy and the other Slytherins likely saw house elves as servants to be used, not beings to be cared for. Mackie's self-awareness was not fundamentally less than Dobby's. He simply hadn't faced the same extremes. Life at Hogwarts could be comfortable for house elves, so radical thoughts rarely took root. If their positions were reversed, Mackie might have acted as dramatically or as violently as Kreacher had in other households. Mackie changed the subject. Draco joined that club, what they call the Necromancer Society. He asked them if the president was a Death Eater. They said no. "They also gave him a ring that sends simple messages," Mackie added, looking at Veed. "They said the idea was inspired by the friend account." Veedy wasn't surprised. The friend account made life easier for wizards, and convenience would be seized by anyone who could use it, including villains. Tools like that were always double-edged. 197. Christmas Holidays. The Christmas holiday had arrived. Though called Christmas break, the holiday actually began a week before Christmas. The day before the term ended, Veedy received a funeral invitation from the House of Black. "Sirius isn't planning to invite many people," Remus told them, "but he wants to make it formal. He thinks Regulus deserves a proper solemn funeral." After discussing it with his parents, V decided to go home after the funeral. Ferdinand and Fiona both said they would support him. Besides Veed, Harry had invited all the Weasleys who were still at school. Their parents were visiting Bill for the holiday, and the rest of the children would otherwise have stayed at Hogwarts. The Weasleys preferred going to play with Harry to remaining at school. It was a relief to get away. Percy had apparently wanted to stay, but the twins had snatched his application to remain behind, so he couldn't be alone. Most of the students from Umbrella House accepted Harry's invitation as well, except Padma, whose parents insisted she go home with her sister. "I really wanted to come with you all," she said apologetically, "but my aunt and cousin came specifically to see us, and my parents, you know how elders are. They always think their own matters are more important." "Don't worry," Michael said quickly. "I'll tell you what we find every day." Padma smiled at him. Theo coughed loudly. They thought no one had noticed the change in their relationship. In truth, everyone except Harry had noticed. On the last day of term, the students still had to leave by train. The thestral-drawn carriages headed toward Hogsmeade, and halfway there, Hagrid shouted, and several carriages came to a halt. They were already in Hogsmeade, and Remus was waiting by the roadside. Veed and the others jumped down from the carriages and greeted him. Percy and Ginny, seeing Remus for the first time, stood together a little reservedly. "Welcome," Remus said with a gentle smile. "Harry." Hagrid, in a separate carriage, stuck his head out and called, "Enjoy your holidays. I'll be at the Blacks in a few days, too." "Okay," Harry called back quickly, then frowned in confusion as other students looked at them. He still didn't know about the funeral. "Goodbye, children. Goodbye, Remus. Say hello to Sirius for me." Hagrid waved as the carriages drove off. "Follow me," Remus said, leading the group toward his home. "Remus, are we going to the Black family's old house?" Harry asked. "Where's Sirius? Isn't he there?" He had expected to see his godfather as soon as he got off the carriage. "Sirius," Remus sighed. "He's not doing too well." Remus explained that the Black family old house was in worse condition than they had expected and might not be livable at the moment. "You'll have to stay at my place tonight," he said. "It isn't large, so you'll probably have to squeeze in." "What happened to Sirius?" Harry asked anxiously. Remus hesitated, exchanged a look with Veed, his expression asking the question none of them had voiced. "You didn't tell Harry?" Veed said quickly. "I thought you would." Veed shrugged and pushed the responsibility back. As they walked, Remus slowly recounted Regulus's story, careful not to mention Horcruxes. The children didn't know Regulus. Most of them had only ever read about Sirius in the papers. Even so, between the two brothers' stories, the weight of it all was plain. For more than a decade, two brothers had fought against Voldemort, one imprisoned in the world's most terrifying prison, the other lost at the bottom of a cold lake. Both had been shamed by history. It felt like a cruel, hellish joke. No one spoke for a while. Finally, Harry said softly, "I want to be with Sirius. He shouldn't be alone now." "Where is he?" "At the Black family old house," Remus said. "Didn't you say that place wasn't suitable to live in?" "Yes," Remus agreed. "The house is in terrible condition. No one has taken care of it since Sirius's mother died. And there's a house elf there who resents outsiders. Sirius has been trying to tidy it up anyway, so his brother can have a dignified funeral." "I can help," Harry said immediately. "We'll help too," Ryan added. "When Harry invited us, didn't he say he hoped we'd help clean? That's what we're here for." Harry flushed. He hadn't realized there would actually be so much work. Everyone laughed, and even the stern Percy couldn't help smiling. Fred said, "My mum always wanted a house elf. I'm curious to see how these creatures cause trouble for their masters." "I came to see what an ancient wizarding family home is like," Michael said, eyes bright with excitement. "The eerier the better." Theo nodded simply. "More people, faster work." Hermione said, "We're not the sort who run away when there's work to be done." "Oh, seriously," Ron muttered, slapping his forehead. "Mum's been making me do chores since I was 3. I'm practically an expert." Everyone eagerly volunteered to help. None of them minded the extra work. Their willingness was so straightforward and pure that Remus couldn't help but smile genuinely. "All right then," he said. "Let's go. I hope you don't regret it once you see the Black family old house." At that point, the Black family house had not yet become the Order's headquarters and was not protected by the Fidelius charm. The Blacks had used generations of magic to keep it hidden from muggles and ill-intentioned wizards, but Sirius had connected it to the Floo network. One by one, they tossed Floo powder into the hearth, shouted, "Number 12, Grimmauld Place," and disappeared into green flames. Veed was the last to step forward. Before he went into the fireplace, he turned to Remus. "Where is Regulus's body?" "In Sirius's house next door," Remus said. "Sirius wants to wait until the funeral arrangements are made before bringing him back." Veed nodded, then said quietly, "I think he should be brought back now." Remus looked at him and said, "The Black family old house might be hateful to Sirius, but for Regulus, it would have been the home he longed for." Veed's words fell quiet in Remus's ears. Sirius had been in terrible pain lately. This was not the clean grief of losing a friend, but the slow torment of discovering a brother only after that brother was dead for over a decade. Seeing Sirius now, Remus had often thought he would have preferred to die in Azkaban. Sirius did not rage or wail. He retreated into a long silence, and when he came out of it finally, he told Remus he wanted to hold a funeral for Regulus. Remus could not refuse. Watching Sirius so hollowed by grief, he had no choice but to try to fulfill the request. Vade's remark had changed the tone of the decision, though. He had not argued from what Sirius wanted, but from what Regulus might have wanted. That perspective might reach Sirius when Remus's gentle pleading would not. After a moment, Remus said, "I'll ask Sirius. If he agrees, we'll bring Regulus home." Sirius could not say no. Those words sounded like something Regulus himself would have wanted. Sirius would not deny him. But bringing Regulus's body back required logistics. They could not apparate a coffin, nor shove it in a fireplace. Remus went to Hagrid to borrow a carriage. The students had already left by train. Hagrid sent the Thestrals back to Hogwarts and brought a carriage to the Black House. Remus cast an engorgement charm on the carriage to make room. Hagrid carefully lifted the coffin with both huge hands and set it down on the wooden planks with a dull thud. Tears spattered the carriage rim. "Regulus, I never liked him before," Hagrid sobbed, pressing his huge handkerchief to his face. "I thought he was just like those nasty Slytherins. I didn't know he was. Such a good person. Why didn't I invite him for a drink when he was at Hogwarts?" Remus gave a sad smile. He did not point out that even an invitation might have been ignored by the proud air of the Blacks. He merely thought how little any of them had really looked at the boy. He envied Hagrid his honesty of grief. If only Sirius could cry like that, perhaps it would ease him. Remus said little, watched Veed settle into the carriage, and thanked Hagrid. "We're ready to go," he said. Hagrid nodded, red-eyed. "Don't worry about Ari and Lewis. Once we drop you off, they'll fly back to Hogwarts on their own." Remus acknowledged it. Veed said his farewells, and Remus tapped the carriage with his wand. The whole thing, coffin and all, went invisible. Two Thestrals spread their bat-like wings and lifted them into the sky. Winter high up was bone cold. Veed waved his wand and formed a hemispherical shield above the carriage that shut out the worst of the wind. "Good thinking, Veed," Remus said, one hand on the coffin and the other on the reins. The Thestrals were clever. A gentle tug told them which way to go. They flew over fields and villages and Muggle towns. Veed saw the Hogwarts Express far below, steam trailing and thinning behind it. As they began to climb a mountain, the carriage pierced the cloud layer. The clouds were a close cotton-white ceiling, like a soft bed calling passersby to lie down. "Can we fly into them, Remus?" Veed called. The wind made them shout. Remus leaned forward and cupped his hand. "What? Can we go into the clouds?" Veed repeated louder. "They'd soak us without the shield." "Oh." Remus glanced at the shimmering shield and realized what Veed meant. He tugged the reins, and the Thestrals dove. White folded around them at once, a limitless expanse. The world narrowed to the carriage and varying shades of cloud. Even breathing felt hushed. Vede smiled into himself and thought, "I'm flying in the clouds." Only a dozen seconds later, they burst out the other side. The Thestrals glittered with water droplets and ice crystals that melted and streaked behind them like stardust. Remus had seen this before. He only made sure of the direction and nudged the reins again. The Thestrals swept down toward a great city. From above, Veed saw London spread beneath them. Tall buildings, interminable lines of Muggle vehicles. He was back in 1992. It felt odd to see a city so alive in daylight. If it had been night, the lights would have dazzled. After so long at Hogwarts, without common electricity, returning to the Muggle world always felt like stepping into a different age. Perhaps that was why so many Muggleborns preferred to live in the wizarding world after graduating, not only because of secrecy, but because life outside changed so fast. They landed on a patch of snow-covered grass. The shield dissolved. The air was nearly 0 in temperature. Veed shivered, gripped the carriage side, and jumped down. Remus thanked the Thestrals and used a levitation charm to lift the coffin off the carriage. The Thestrals took 2 steps and were airborne again, the carriage following, and with a soft boom, snowflakes scattered over the faces of the 2 men. Veed wiped snow from his lashes, blinking, a little dazed. and then heard a deep, hoarse voice nearby. "You've worked hard, Remus Veed. Leave him to me." Veed turned his head and almost convinced himself he'd mistaken the figure for someone else. Sirius looked as if he'd just crawled out of Azkaban. A ragged beard, long hair matted into unkempt strands, eyes like dark, bottomless wells. He had the pallor of a ghost. Behind him loomed the ancient black family house. Its carved door was battered and scored. The stone walls were grimy and crumbling, reclaimed by moss and climbing vines. The yard was a tangle of weeds with only a narrow, barely cleared path. A garden gnome in a pointed hat peeked out from the undergrowth, as if watching the newcomers. "Hi, Sirius," Lupin said in an ironically light tone. "How are the kids doing?" "All right," Sirius replied flatly. He nodded politely to them and carried the coffin through the door. "Has he been like this lately?" Veed asked in a low voice after Sirius had gone out of sight. "Yes," Lupin sighed. "I hope he'll get better after the funeral." They climbed the broken stone steps. As they did, the ridiculous gnome suddenly floated up, spun wildly in the air, then shot off with a sharp whoosh. Veed glanced back. Lupin grinned and said, "You have to spin them until they're dizzy and throw them away so they can't find their hole. That's how you get rid of gnomes. They love wrecking plant roots and messing up the garden." "I know. I've read about garden gnomes," Veedy said, incredulous. "Remus, what sort of person do you think I am? You think I'd pity a gnome?" Lupin blinked, then laughed awkwardly. "Sorry, my head's been fuzzy lately." They crossed the threshold. The old black house was oddly like the Slytherin common room, dark, dungeon-like, with small dirty windows choked in cobwebs that shut out the daylight. Even in daytime, the gas lamps along the walls were kept lit. Veed guessed Lupin had insisted on them. Sirius seemed intent on burying himself and would have paid no heed to the lighting either way. The house had once been grand, ornate wallpaper, richly patterned carpets, chandeliers twisting into delicate coils, and faintly glowing gold. Now the wallpaper peeled, carpets were stained, cobwebs draped the chandeliers, and the whole place smelled of rot. Sirius carried the coffin up the stairs toward what had been Regulus's room. Michael and the others had been heading downstairs when they saw it. Their eyes widened and they pressed back against the wall, not daring to make a sound. Ginny, walking behind them, let out a sharp scream when she saw the coffin. "Oh, sorry," she stammered. Sirius seemed to snap back to attention and offered a stiff, polite smile. "Don't be frightened, Miss Weasley. He won't bite." Then two long velvet curtains were yanked apart as if by unseen hands, and a shrill, ferocious scream filled the hall. "Beast, spendthrift, disgrace to the family, the child I gave birth to. How dare you return? Why won't you die? Get out, you bastard! Werewolf, mudblood, whore, out of my house!" A life-sized portrait of an old woman in a black hat, her skin waxy and yellow, was shouting curses at the top of her lungs. Immediately, the other portraits along the walls woke and joined in with deafening screams. The young wizards clapped hands over their ears as if their heads might split. Sirius, however, acted as if he heard nothing. He kept the same strained smile and with forced calm said to Ginny, "Could you step aside, Miss Weasley?" Ginny stood frozen until Ron hauled her out of the way. "Thank you," Sirius said, and continued up the stairs with the coffin. Regulus's room was on the 5th floor. In the hall below, Lupin battled to close the curtains and fired stupefy at the noisier portraits until the screaming subsided. Harry and the others dropped their hands and came down from the upper floors. "Veedy, you're finally here," Michael said, looking disheveled. He raised a hand as if to wave, his eyes dull. "You should see what we've been doing all morning." "Like I said," Lupin said warily, "this place is uninhabitable for now." A few of the younger wizards looked sheepish. They'd been so confident earlier, but now they shuffled, awkward. "You're right. Maybe we should stop and go to your place," one offered. "I thought a few more cleaning spells would do it." Michael muttered, "We're very good with those." "But the house is resisting magic," Hermione said hesitantly. "Cleaning charms barely work. It's like it's refusing to be cleaned. We'll have to do it by hand." "There's a very annoying house elf in here," George added. "I see now how much trouble they can be when they don't obey." "Why doesn't Mr. Black just free him?" Percy asked, puzzled. "Having a house elf like that is worse than not having one." Sirius said Regulus used to be very fond of him, Harry replied uncertainly. As if on cue, The subject of their conversation shuffled into the hall, a house elf with wrinkled skin and tufts of white hair sprouting from his ears. He was ancient and bony, wearing a dirty rag around his waist, his pale eyes clouded. Veed, this is Creature," Harry offered in an apologetic voice. "Another brat has come, making the mistress angry," Creature muttered in a croaking voice. "Nasty scum, ruining the mistress's house like gnomes." "Shut up, Creature," Harry snapped. Creature fell silent for a beat, then bowed with an officious little movement. "Yes, young master, Creature greets you," he muttered again under his breath. "It's that brat the spendthrift brought back. They say he defeated the Dark Lord, but Creature does not see such greatness." Harry flushed and hurried to explain. "He's very old and muddled. He says rude things. Sirius told us to let him be. He won't live much longer anyway." Veed crouched down to meet the house elf's eye. "Hello, Creature," he said. "Has no one told you why we're all here?" Creature seemed barely to register him, or else he simply preferred not to be bothered. He muttered on, confusedly and bitterly. "Creature serves the noble house of Black for life, but Creature does not wish to serve the spendthrift young master. The mistress hated him so much, everything about him disappointed the mistress." Veed ignored the rambling and spoke plainly. "We are here for Regulus Black's funeral." Creature's muttering cut off. His pale eyes bulged like a bullfrog's as he stared at V and, in a very small voice, asked, "Regulus Black's funeral?" He sounded as if he could not quite believe it. "Hey, this thing could hear us all along," Ron snapped, irritated. For a while they had been trying to clean while enduring Creature's insults. Ron had traded a few barbs with the house elf, but the Creature had mostly ignored him. Hermione had said Creature was muddled and not making clear sense, which was the only reason Ron had kept his hands to himself. The two people at the center of their attention weren't paying him any mind. Veed had already done too much to be an unsung hero now. He said simply, "Not long ago we found Mr. Regulus Black's body in a cave, along with a locket and a note he left for someone. We know he made a great sacrifice to resist Lord Voldemort, so Sirius decided to hold a proper funeral. He came back here to clean the house for that reason. We came to help for that reason." Creature's mouth fell open in shock. The mention of the locket and the note made everything click for him. His whole body trembled, he swayed, and in a hoarse voice asked, "Then, Regulus Black, he is now." "Sirius just took him to the bedroom," Veed had said. "If you'd come out a little earlier, you would have seen them." Before he finished, there was a soft pop, and Creature vanished. Everyone knew what that meant. He had apparated upstairs to greet his long-lost master. Veed rose, and the others stared at him, stunned. "House elves have a magical bond with their house," he explained. "If Creature understands why we're here and no longer hates or rejects us, the cleaning will be much easier. And don't be fooled by his age," he added. "He's not an ordinary old servant. He's extraordinary." Theo glanced at the person beside him. "Veed, how do you know he'll cooperate afterward?" Veed raised an eyebrow. "Didn't Harry say it? Regulus liked him very much when he was alive. A house elf's feelings are very pure. If he loved Regulus, he'll do anything for him." The room fell silent. Percy, standing on the second-floor landing, found himself inexplicably compelled to look toward the second-year student in the hall. Then someone cleared their throat. "Why didn't you tell Creature why we came?" Excuses tumbled out in a rush. He started cursing the moment he appeared. "I was busy arguing with him. I thought he was hard of hearing." "No need to repeat it for him. Everyone knows. A funeral, it's too sad to bring up. We were busy enough doing the work." They all tried to prove they hadn't been thoughtless, only distracted. Lupin smiled wryly and, prompted by some invisible pressure, explained, "I thought mentioning it would only add to Sirius's pain." A heart-wrenching wail came from upstairs, reverberating down the winding staircase. Lupin's voice faltered. "I'll go up and see." "I'll come," Harry said quickly. Lupin hesitated, then said, "All right, Veed, you come too, okay?" "Of course," Veed answered without hesitation. Fred was quick to wave them off. "Don't worry about entertaining us. Go, take care of him. We'll rest here." "There's butterbeer in the kitchen," someone added. The three of them hurried up the creaking stairs. They passed dim portraits along the walls and did not miss the heads of house elves hanging nearby. By the time they reached the 5th floor, They could hear Creature thumping his head against the floor and wailing. Creature failed to carry out Regulus Black's orders. Creature could not destroy the locket. He hit the floor, pleading and apologizing incoherently to his dead young master. "Stop, Creature," Sirius said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Tell me everything. How did Regulus Black die? What orders did he give you? What about the locket?" The bedroom door stood open. In the dim light, they could see a black coffin. Sirius sat on the floor, his back against the coffin lid. In the shadow, his face was indistinct. Only his eyes caught and held a faint, haunted light. Creature lay prostrate, weeping, and then, forced by grief and command, told his tale in a ragged, agonized voice. Regulus Black had been proud of his pure-blood heritage and joined the Death Eaters at 16. A year later, when the Dark Lord demanded a house elf, Regulus had offered Creature, no doubt thinking it an honor. Voldemort took Creature to the cave and ordered him to drink a potion. He watched as Inferi dragged him into the water to test the safeguards around the Horcrux. He had not expected the house elf to return. But Creature had come back. When he left home, Regulus had told him to return after completing the task, and so Creature apparated home. Voldemort, who had underestimated the difference between house elf and wizard magic, had not foreseen that his anti-apparition wards would not stop Creature. When Regulus learned what had happened, he was terrified and told Creature to hide and not to leave the house. Later, Regulus had the house elf take him back to that same cave. This time, Regulus drank the potion himself. He ordered Creature not to tend to him, not to tell his mother what he had done, but he charged Creature absolutely to destroy the locket. But the locket's magic was powerful, and Creature could not carry out his master's final command. When Creature finished, he lay on the floor, Tenama, wailing and sobbing, his face streaked with tears and snot. Sirius sat before him in stunned silence for a long time. Veed nudged Harry gently. Harry, still numb from the story, stumbled forward a few clumsy steps until his eyes adjusted to the dimness. He saw Sirius broken and in tears. His nose burned. He felt awkward, helpless. He opened his arms and hugged his godfather. Sirius, who had been staring into the dark, looked ghastly pale. His hands were clenched and his body shook. After a long minute, he let out a hoarse, shuddering sob. Lupin breathed out softly, shocked yet oddly relieved that Sirius could finally let himself grieve instead of holding himself together. He had seen wizards make house elves serve and sacrifice for them, but never a wizard sacrifice his own life for a house elf. Veed lingered at the doorway, not wanting to step fully into the room heavy with sorrow. "Remus, comfort Creature," he said quietly. "I'll go notify Dumbledore." After that last trip to the cave, Veed had already arranged a direct line of contact with Dumbledore so they could reach him without delay. This matter, the true and false Horcruxes and the vanished locket, had to be reported straight away. If anyone knew anything about the missing locket, it would be Creature. Lupin nodded without hesitation and moved into the room. Veed gave the grieving scene a long, hard look, then turned and left.